Section 1 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Sonali. Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2. Translated by Cecil Henry Bompas. How Sabai Grass Grew. Once upon a time, there were 7 brothers who had an only sister. These brothers undertook the excavation of a large tank, but although they spent large sums and dug very deep, they could not reach water and the tank remained dry. One day, as they were consulting what to do to get the tank to fill, they saw a jogi coming towards them with a lota in his hand. They at once called to him to come and advise them, for they thought that, as he spent his time wandering from country to country, he might somewhere have learned something which would be of use to them. All the jogi said to them was, "You have a sister. If you sacrifice her, the tank will fill with water." The brothers were fond of the girl, but in their despair at seeing the labor wasted, they agreed to give the advice of the jogi a trial. So they told their mother the next day that, when their sister brought them out their midday meal, she was to be dressed in her best and carry the rice in a new basket, and must bring a new water pot to draw their water in. At midday, the girl went down to her brothers with her best cloth and all her jewelry on. And when they saw their victim coming, they could not keep from tears. She asked them what they were grieving for. They told her that nothing was the matter and sent her to draw water in her new water pot from the dry tank. Directly the girl drew near to the bank, the water began to bubble up from the bottom, and when she went down to the water's edge, it rose to her in step. She bent down to fill her pot, but the pot would not fill, though the water rose higher and higher. Then she sang, "The water has risen, brother, and wetted my ankle, brother, but still the lota in my hand will not sink below the surface." But the water rose to her knees, and the pot would not fill, and she sang, "The water has risen, brother, and wetted my knees, brother, but still the lota in my hand will not sink below the surface." Then the water rose to her waist, and the pot would not fill, and she sang, "The water has risen, brother, and wetted my waist, brother, but still the lota in my hand will not sink below the surface." Then the water reached her neck, and the pot would not fill, and she sang, "The water has risen, brother, and wetted my neck, brother, but still the lota in my hand will not sink below the surface." At last it flowed over her head, and the water pot was filled, but the girl was drowned. The tank, however, remained brimful of sparkling water. Now the unhappy girl had been betrothed, and her wedding day was just at hand. On the day fixed, the marriage broker came to announce the approach of the bridegroom, who shortly afterwards arrived at the outskirts of the village in his palki. The 7 brothers met him, and the usual dancing began. The bridegroom's party, however, wished to know why the bride did not appear. The brothers put them off with various excuses, saying that the girl had gone with her friends to gather firewood or to the river to draw water. At last the bridegroom's party got tired of waiting and turned to go home, in great wrath at the way in which they had been treated. On their way they passed by the tank in which the girl had been sacrificed, and, growing in the middle of it, they saw a most beautiful flower. The bridegroom at once determined to possess this, and he told his drummers to pick it for him. But whenever one of them tried to pick it, the flower moved out of his reach, and a voice came from the flower saying, "Take the flower, drummer, but the branch you must not break." And when they told him what the flower sang, the bridegroom said that he would try and pick it himself. No sooner had he reached the bank than the flower of its own accord floated towards him, and he pulled it up by the roots and took it with him into the palki. After they had gone a little way, the palki bearers felt the palki strangely heavy, and when they looked in, they found a bride also sitting in it, dressed in yellow garments, for the flower was really the girl who had been drowned. So they joyfully took the happy couple with drumming and music to the bridegroom's house. In a short time, misfortune befell the 7 brothers. They fell into the deepest poverty and were forced to earn what they could by selling leaves and sticks which they gathered in the jungle. As they went about selling these, they one day came to the village where their sister was living, and as they cried their wares through the streets, they were told to go to the house where the marriage had taken place. They went there, and as they were selling their leaf plates, their sister saw and recognized them. They had only ragged loincloths on, and the skins were black and cracked like a crocodile's. At the sight, their sister began to cry. Her friends asked what was the matter, and she said a straw from the thatch had run into her eye. So they pulled down some of the thatch. She still went on crying, and they again asked what was wrong. She said that she had knocked her foot against a stone in the ground. So they dug up the stone and threw it away. But she still went on weeping, and at last confessed that the miserable-looking leaf-sellers were her brothers. Then her husband's parents told her to be comforted. And they gave the brothers oil and bade them to go and bathe and oil the bodies. But the brothers were so hungry that when they got to the bathing place, they drank the oil and ate the oil cake that had been given to them, and came back with the skins as rough as when they went. So then they were given more oil, and some of the household went with them and made them bathe and oil themselves properly, and then brought them to the house and gave them new clothes and made them a feast of meat and rice. According to the custom of the country, they were made to sit down in order of age and were helped in that order. When they had all been helped and had eaten, the sister said to them, "Now, brothers, you come running to me for food, and yet you sacrificed me in the tank." Then they were overwhelmed with shame. They looked up at the sky, but there was no escape there. They looked down at the earth, and the earth split open, and they all ran into the chasm. The sister tried to catch the youngest brother by the hair and pull him out, calling, "Come back, brother! Come back, brother! You shall carry my baby about for me." But his hair came off in her hand, and the earth swallowed him all up. The sister planted the hair in a corner of the garden, and it is said that from that human hair, Sabai grass originated. End of section 1. Section 2 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Merchant's Son and the Raja's Daughter. Once a merchant's wife and a Raja's wife were both with child, and one day as they baked together, they fell into conversation, and they agreed that if they both bore daughters, then the girls should be flower friends, while if one had a son and one a daughter, then the children should marry. And they committed the agreement to writing. A month or two later, the Raja's wife bore a daughter, and the merchant's wife a son. When the children grew up a bit, they were sent to school, and as they were both very intelligent, they soon learned to read and write. At the school, the boys used to be taught in an upstairs room, and the girls on the ground floor. One day, the boy wrote out a copy of the agreement which their mothers had made, and threw it down to the girl who was below. She read it, and from that day they began to correspond with each other. Love soon followed, and they decided to elope. They fixed a day, and they arranged that the boy should wait for the girl under a thuru tree outside the town. When the evening came, the girl made haste to cook her parents' supper, and then, when they went to bed, she had as usual to soothe them to sleep by rubbing their limbs. All this took a long time, and the merchant's son soon got tired of waiting. So he sang to the tree, be witness for me through tree, when the Raja's daughter comes." And so singing, he tied his horse to the roots of the tree, and himself climbed up into the branches. And sitting in the tree, he pulled off and threw down a number of twigs. Late at night, the Raja's daughter came. She saw the horse tied and the twigs scattered on the ground, but no other sign of a lover. And at last she got tired of waiting and called the thuru tree to witness, singing, Be witness for me through tree when the merchant's son comes." As she finished her song, the merchant's son threw down a large branch to her. So she looked up and saw him sitting in the tree. Then she climbed up to him and began to scold him for putting her to the pain of waiting so long. He retorted, "It was you who made me anxious by keeping me waiting." "That was not my fault. You know how much work a woman has to do. I had to cook the supper and put my parents to bed and rub them to sleep. Come down and let us be off." So they climbed down from the tree and mounted the horse and rode off to a far country. On the road, the girl became very thirsty, but in the dense jungle they could find no water. At last the merchant's son threw a stone at hazard, and they heard it splash in a pool. So they went in the direction of the sound, and there they found water, but it was foul and full of worms, and the girl refused to drink it. She said that she would only drink water which had a father and mother. So they went on their way, and after a time they came to a number of crows holding a meeting, and in the midst was an owl with its head nodding drowsily. It was seeing dreams for them. Every now and then a crow would give it a shove and ask what it had dreamt, but the owl only murmured that it had not finished and went off to sleep again. At last it said, "I have seen a gander and a goose go down into a river and swim about in it." The merchant's son and his companion went on, and presently came to a river in full flood, which was quite uncrossable. On the far bank was a cow lowing to a calf which had been left on the bank where they were. When she saw them, the girl began to sing, "The cow lows for its calf, the calf bleats for its mother. My father and mother are weeping for me at home." When he heard her lament like this, the merchant's son exclaimed, "You women are all alike. Come, let us go back." "How can we go back now?" answered the girl. "You, of course, can pretend that you have been hunting, but we women lose our character if we are hidden by a bush for a minute." So as they could not cross the river by themselves, a goose and gander carried them across on their backs. As they went on, the merchant's son asked the girl how far she would like to go, a 6 days' journey or a 6 months' journey. He told her that in the 6 months' journey they would only have fruits and roots and such like to eat and water to drink, but the 6 days' journey was easy and free from hardship. The girl chose the 6 days' journey. So they went on for 6 days and came to a stream on the banks of which stood a cottage in which lived an old woman. Before they went up to it, the girl told her lover not to eat any rice given to him by the old woman, but to throw it to the fowls. Then they went and asked to be allowed to cook their food there. Now the woman had 7 unmarried sons, who were away hunting at the time, and when she saw the Raja's daughter, she wished to detain her and marry her to one of her sons. So in order to delay them, she gave them a damp stove and green firewood to cook with. She also offered the merchant's son some poisoned rice, but he threw it to the fowls, and when they ate it, they fell down dead. The girl could not make the fire burn with the green wood, so they hurried away as fast as they could without waiting to cook any food. Before they started, however, the old woman managed to tie up some mustard seed in a cloth and fasten it to their horse's tail, so that as they rode, the seed was spilt along the road they took. When the old woman's son came back from hunting, she greeted them by saying, "Why did you not come back sooner? I have just found a pretty wife for you, but I have tied mustard seeds to their horse's tail, and it is being scattered along the road. In one place it is sprouting, in another it is flowering, in another it is seeding, and in other it is ripe. When you get to the place where it is ripe, you will catch them." So the 7 brothers pursued the 2 lovers and caught them up, but the merchant's son cut down 6 of them with his sword. The 7th, however, hid under the horse's belly and begged for mercy, and offered to serve them as groom to the horse. This man's name was Dama Gurguria. They spared his life and he followed them running behind the horse. But he watched his opportunity and caught the merchant's son unawares and killed him with his sword. Then he told the girl that she belonged to him, and she admitted it and asked that she might ride behind him on the horse. So Dama Gurguria mounted and took her up behind him and turned homewards. He could not see what the girl was doing, and they had not gone far when she drew his sword and killed him with it. Then she rode back to where the body of her lover lay and began to weep over it. As she sat there, a man in shining white cloth appeared and asked what was the matter. She told him Dama Gurguria had killed her lover. Then he bade her stop crying and go and wet a gamcha he gave her and come straight back with it without looking behind her, and then pick a miral twig and beat the corpse with it. So the girl took the gamcha and went and dipped it in a pool. But as she was bringing it back, she heard a loud roaring behind her, and she looked back to see what it was. So the stranger sent her back again to the pool, and this time she did not look round, though she heard the same roaring. Then the stranger told her to join the severed head to the body and cover it with the wet gamcha, and then after waiting a little, to beat the body with the miral twig. So saying, he disappeared. The girl carefully complied with these instructions, and to her joy saw the merchant's son soon sit up and rub his eyes, remarking that he must have been asleep for a long time. Great was his astonishment when he heard how Dama Gurguria had killed him, and how he had been restored to life by the help of a stranger in white. This was the end of the lovers' troubles, and they lived happily ever after. End of section 2. Section 3 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Flycatcher's Egg. One day a herd boy found a flycatcher's egg and he brought it home and asked his mother to cook it for him. But she put it on a shelf and forgot about it. His mother was a poor woman and had to go out all day to work. So before she started, she used always to cook her son's dinner and leave it covered up all ready for him. No sooner had she gone to work than a bonga girl used to come out of the flycatcher's egg and first eat up the rice that had been left for the herd boy, and then quickly put water on to boil and cook some rice with pearls, and, having eaten part of it, cover up the rest, ready for the herd boy on his return. Then she used to comb and dress her hair and go back into the egg. This happened every day, and at last the boy asked his mother why she gave him rice cooked with pearls every day, as he was tired of it. His mother was much astonished and said that someone must have been changing his food, because she always cooked his rice with vegetables. At this the boy resolved to watch and see who was touching his food. So one day he climbed up onto the rafters and lay in wait. Presently out of the egg came the bonga girl and cooked the food and combed her hair as usual. Just as she was going back into the egg, the herd boy sprang down and caught her. "Fee! Fee!" cried she. "Is it a dome or a hardy who is clasping me?" "No dome or hardy," said he. "We are husband and wife." So he took her to wife, and they lived happily together. He strictly forbade her ever to go outside the house, and he said incantations over some mustard seed and gave it to her, and told her that if any beggars came, she was to give them alms through the window, and if they refused to take them in that way, then she was to throw the mustard seeds at them, but on no account to go outside the house. One day, when her husband was away, a jogi came begging. The bonga girl offered him alms through the window, but the jogi flatly refused to take them. He insisted on her coming out of the house and giving them. Then she threw the mustard seed at him, and he turned into ashes. By superior magic, however, he at once recovered his own form and again insisted on her coming outside to give him alms. So she went out to him, and he saw how beautiful she was. The Jogi went away, and one day he went to beg at the Raja's palace, and, talking to the Raja, he told him how he had seen a girl of more than human beauty. The Raja resolved to possess her, and one day he took the form of a fly and flew to the house and saw the beautiful Bonga. A second day he came back in the same form, and suddenly caught her up and flew off with her on his back to his palace, and in spite of her weeping, shut her up in a beautifully furnished room on the roof of his palace. There she had to stay, and her food was brought to her there. When the herd boy came home and found that his beautiful wife was missing, he filled the air with lamentations, and leaving his home he put on the garb of a Jogi and went about begging. One day he came to the palace of the Raja, who had carried off his wife. As he begged, he heard his wife's voice, so he sang, "Give me, oh give me, my flycatcher wife, give me my many-coloured wife." Then they offered him a jar full of money to pacify him, but he threw the rupees away one by one and continued his lament. Then the Raja called for his 2 dogs, Rauta and Paika, and set them on the man, and they tore him to death. At this his wife wept grievously and begged him to let her out, since there was no one to carry her away, now that her husband was dead. They prepared to take away the corpse to burn it, and the Bonga girl asked to be allowed to go with them, as she had never seen the funeral rites of a Jogi, so they let her go. Before starting, she tied a little salt in the corner of her cloth. When she reached the burning place, she sang to the 2 dogs, "Build the pyre, Rauta and Paika. Alas, the dogs have bitten the Jogi. Alas, they have chased and killed the Jogi." So the 2 dogs built the pyre and laid the body on it. Then she ordered them to split more wood, singing, "Cut the wood, Rauta and Paika. Alas, the dogs have bitten the Jogi. Alas, they have chased and killed the Jogi." So they split more wood, and then she told them to apply the fire, singing, "Light the fire, Rauta and Paika. Alas, the dogs have bitten the Jogi. Alas, they have chased and killed the Jogi." When the pyre was in full blaze, she suddenly said to the dogs, "Look up, Rauta and Paika. See, the stars are shining in the daytime." When the 2 dogs looked up, she threw the salt into their eyes, and, while they were blinded, she sprang into the flames and died as a sati on the body of her husband. End of section 3. Section 4 of the Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Wife Who Would Not Be Beaten. There was once a Raja's son who announced that he would marry no woman who would not allow him to beat her every morning and evening. The Raja's servants hunted high and low in vain for a bride who would consent to these terms. At long last, they found a maiden who agreed to be beaten morning and evening if the prince would marry her. So the wedding took place, and for 2 or 3 days the prince hesitated to begin the beating. But one morning he got up, and taking a stick from the corner, went to his bride and told her that she must have her beating. "Wait a minute," said she. "There is one thing I want to point out to you before you beat me. It is only on the strength of your father's position that you play the fine gentleman like this. Your wealth is all your father's, and it is on his wealth that you are relying. When you have earned something for yourself and made a position for yourself, then I am willing that you should beat me, and not before." The prince saw that what his bride said was true and held his hand. Then, in order to earn wealth for himself, he set out on a trading expedition, taking quantities of merchandise loaded in sacks, and he had a large band of retainers with him, mounted on horses and elephants, and altogether made a fine show. The princess sent one of her own servants with the prince, and gave him secret instructions to watch his opportunity, and if ever, when the prince was bathing, he should throw away a loincloth, to take possession of it without the prince knowing anything about it, and bring it to her. The prince journeyed on till he came to the country called Lutia. The Raja of Lutia was walking on the roof of his palace and saw the cavalcade approaching, and he sent a Sipahi to meet the prince and ask him this question: "Have you the secret of prosperity forever, or of prosperity for a day?" When this question was put to the prince, he answered that he had the secret of prosperity forever. When the Lutia Raja was told of this answer, he ordered his men to stop the prince's train. So they surrounded them and seized all the merchandise, and the prince's retainers fled on their horses and elephants, and left him alone and penniless. In his distress, the prince was forced to take service with a rich Hindoo, and he had nothing to live on but what his master chose to give him, and all he had to wear was a loincloth like the poorest labourer. The only man who did not desert him was the servant whom the princess had sent. And one day he saw the prince had thrown away an old loincloth while bathing. This he picked up and took home to his mistress, who put it away. When she heard all that had happened to her husband, she set out in her turn to the Lutia country, and all she took with her was a mouse and a shawl. When she reached the Lutia country, the Raja as before sent a messenger to ask whether she knew the secret of prosperity for ever, or of prosperity for a day. She answered, "Prosperity for a day." Thereupon the Raja had her sent for, and also all the retainers who had deserted the prince and who had collected together in the neighbourhood. When they had all come, the Raja said he would now decide who should have all the wealth which had been taken from the prince. He produced a cat and said that the person towards whom the cat jumped should have all the wealth. So they all sat round the Raja, and the princess had her mouse hidden under her shawl, and every now and then she kept uncovering its head and covering it up again. The cat soon caught sight of the mouse, and, when the Raja let it go, it jumped straight to the princess in hopes of catching the mouse. The Raja at once adjudged all the merchandise to her, and she loaded it on the horses and elephants and took it home accompanied by her husband's retainers. A few days afterwards her husband came home, having got tired of working as a servant, and, putting a bold face on it, he went up to her and said that now he was going to beat her. All the retainers who had accompanied him when he set out to trade, and also the servant whom the princess had sent with him, were present. Then, before them all, the princess took up the old loincloth and asked him if he knew to whom it had belonged. At this reminder of his poverty, the prince was dumb with shame. "Ask your retainers," continued the princess, "to whom all the merchandise with which you set out now rightfully belongs. Ask them whether it is yours or mine, and then say whether you will beat me." The prince had no answer to give her, and after this lesson gave up all idea of beating his bride. End of section 4. Section 5 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bumpus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. Sahde Goala. Once a marriage was arranged between Sahde Goala and Princess Chandaini, and on the wedding day, when it began to get dusk, Sahde Goala ordered the sun to stand still. "How," said he, "can the people see the wedding of a mighty man like myself in the dark?" So at his behest, the sun delayed its setting for an hour, and the great crowd which had assembled saw all the grand ceremonies. The next day Sahde and his bride set off home, and it took them 3 days to reach the place where he lived. Before they left, they had invited the prince's father to come and see them. Accordingly, a day or two later he set out. But it took him 3 months to accomplish the distance which Sahde Goala had traversed in 3 days. When the old Raja reached his son-in-law's house, they welcomed him and washed his feet and offered him refreshments. And when he had eaten, he asked his son-in-law to take him out for a stroll. So they went out, Sahde Goala in front and the old Raja following behind him, and as they walked, Sahde Goala struck his foot against a stone, and the stone was shattered to pieces. When the Raja saw this proof of his son-in-law's superhuman strength, he became alarmed for his daughter's safety. If Sahde ever lost his temper with her, he might clearly smash her to atoms. So he made up his mind that he could not leave her in such keeping. When he told his daughter what he had seen, she was as frightened as her father and begged him to take her home. So they agreed to escape together sometime when Sahde Goala was out of the way. One morning, Sahde Goala went out to watch his men working in the fields, and the old Raja and his daughter seized this opportunity to escape. Sahde Goala had a sister named Lorokini, and she ran to the field to tell her brother that his wife was running away. "Let her go," said Sahde Goala. The old Raja travelled faster than his daughter and left her behind, and as she travelled along alone, Sahde Goala made a flooded river flow across her path. It was quite unfordable, so the princess stood on the bank and sang, "My mother gave me birth, my father gave me marriage. If the water upstream would stand still and the water downstream would flow away, then I could go and live in my own home." But no such thing happened, and she had to go back to her husband's house. When she arrived, her mother-in-law gave her a large basket of cooked rice and a pot of relish and told her to take them to the labourers in the field. Her mother-in-law helped her to lift the basket onto her head and she set off. When she reached the field, she called to her sister-in-law, "Come, Lorokini, lift down from my head the basket of rice and the pot of relish." But Lorokini was angry with her for trying to run away and refused to help, singing, "I will not come. I will not lift down the basket. Prop it against a muruk tree. I will not lift it down." Then Chandani Rani propped it against the trunk of a muruk tree and so set it on the ground. Then she sang to her husband, "Here, husband, is the lota or water. Here, husband, is the tooth stick. Come and wash your hands. If you are angry with me, take me back to my father and mother." But Sahde Goala was puffing at the head of his men and paid no attention to her. Then she sang again, 700 labourers and 200 women labourers, you were causing to die of thirst." But still Sahde Goala paid no attention. Then Chandani Rani got angry and by leaning the basket against the muruk tree, managed to get it onto her head again and carried it home. And from that time muruk trees grow slanting. Directly she had taken the rice and relish to the house, she set off again to run away to her mother. As before, Sahde Goala caused a flooded river to flow across her path, and as before she sang, "My mother gave me birth, my father gave me in marriage. If the water upstream would stand still and the water downstream would flow away, then I could go and live in my own home." And this time the water did stand still, and the water below all flowed away, and she crossed over. As she crossed, she said, "If I am really chaste, no one will be able to touch me." And as she reached the opposite bank, she saw a young man sitting waiting for her. His name was Bozomunda. He had been sitting waiting for her on the bank for days without moving. When he saw Chandani Rani mount the bank, he rose and said, "Come, I have been waiting for you, and you are to be my mistress." "Fee, fee," answered she. "Am I to belong to any dome or hurry?" Bozomunda swore that she should be his. "If so, then follow a little behind me so as not to tread on my shadow." So they went on, the Rani in front and Bozomunda behind. Presently they came to a tamarind tree on which grew 2 enormous fruits. The Rani pointed to them, saying, "If I am to belong to you, you must pick me those fruits." So Bozomunda began to climb the tree, and as he climbed, she prayed that the tree might grow and touch the sky. And in fact, as fast as Bozomunda climbed, so the tree grew, and he got no nearer to the fruit. Then the Chandani Rani picked up the weapons which he had laid on the ground and threw them away, one to the north and one to the south, one to the east and one to the west, and ran off as fast as she could. Bozomunda at first did not see her, because his eyes were fixed on the tamarind fruit. But after she had gone a long way, he caught sight of her and came down as fast as he could, and, gathering up his weapons, went in pursuit. But Chandani Rani had got a long start, and as she hurried along, she passed a thorn tree standing by the side of the road, and she called to it, "Thorn tree, Bozomunda is coming after me. Do your best to detain him for a little." As she spoke, it seemed as if a weight descended on the tree and swayed it to and fro, so that its branches swept the ground, and it answered her, "I will do like this to him." Then she went on and met a goat on the road, and she asked it to do its best to delay Bozomunda. And the goat pawed the ground and dug its horns into the earth and said that it would do the same to Bozomunda. Then she went on and met a ram and made the same request. The ram charged a tree and butted it right over and promised to treat Bozomunda in the same way. Afterwards, she came to a bull, and the bull drove its horns into a bank and brought down a quantity of earth and said that that was the way he would treat Bozomunda. Next, she came to a buffalo, and the buffalo charged a bank of earth to show what he would do to Bozomunda. Then she came to an elephant, and the elephant trampled a clod of earth to dust and said that he would treat Bozomunda so. Then she went on and saw a paddy bird feeding by the roadside, and she asked it to do its best to delay Bozomunda. The paddy bird drove its bill into the earth and said that it would treat Bozomunda in the same way. Meanwhile, Bozomunda was in hot pursuit. When he came to the thorn tree, the tree swayed its branches and caught him with its thorns. But he cut down the tree and freed himself. He went on a little way and met the goat, which ran at him with its horns. But Bozomunda sang, "Do not fight me, goat. I will cut off your legs and cut off your head, and take them to the shrine of Mahadev." So saying, he killed the goat and cut off its head, and tied it to his waist and went on. Next the ram charged him, but he sang, "Do not fight me, ram. I will cut off your legs and cut off your head, and take them to the shrine of Mahadev." So saying, he killed the ram and took its head. Then in succession he was attacked by the bull and the buffalo and the elephant, but he killed them all and cut off their heads. Then he came to the paddy bird, which pretended to be busily engaged in picking up insects and gradually worked its way nearer and nearer. Bozomunda let it get quite close and then suddenly seized it and gave its neck a pull, which lengthened it out considerably. "Thank you," said the paddy bird as he put it down. "Now I shall be able to catch all the fish in a pool without moving." Thereupon Bozomunda caught it again and gave its neck a jerk, and that is why paddy birds have necks shaped like a letter S. Bozomunda continued his pursuit and caught up Chandani Rani just as she was entering her father's house. He seized her by her hair and managed to cut off the edge of her cloth and pull off one of her golden anklets, and then had to let her go. He took up his abode at the ghat of a tank and began to kill everyone who came down to the water. The citizens complained to the Raja of the destruction he was causing, and the Raja ordered some valiant man to be searched for, fit to do battle with the murderer. So they sent for a Birbanta, giant, and the Raja promised to give him half his kingdom and his daughter in marriage if he could slay Bozomunda. So the Birbanta made ready for the fight and advanced brandishing his weapons against Bozomunda. 3 days and 3 nights they fought, and in the end the Birbanta was defeated and killed. Then the Raja ordered his subjects to find another champion, and a Birburi was found willing to undertake the fight in hope of the promised reward. And as he was being taken to the field of battle, his mother met him with a ladle full of curds and told him to do a war dance. And as he was dancing round, she threw the curds at him. He caught the whole of it on his shield, except one drop, which fell on his thigh. From this his mother foresaw that he would bleed to death in the fight. So she took some rice and ran on ahead, and again met her son, and told him to do the war dance, and show how he was going to fight. And as he danced, his sword shivered to atoms. His mother said, "Is this the way in which you intended to fight? Of a surety you would have met your death." Then she made him gather together the pieces of his sword and cover them with a wet cloth, and in a few minutes the pieces joined together. Then she allowed him to go to the fight. When the battle began, the Birburi's mother kept calling out, "Well, Bozomunda, have you killed my son?" This enraged Bozomunda, and he kept running after the old woman to drive her away. And this gave the opportunity to the Birburi to get in a good blow. In this way they fought for 7 days and nights, and at the end Bozomunda was defeated and killed. Then the Raja gave half his kingdom to the Birburi and married him to his daughter Chandani Rani. After their marriage, they set out for their new home, and on the way they met Sahde Goala, who had come in search of his missing wife. "Hello!" cried Sahde Goala. "Where are you taking my wife to?" "I know nothing about your wife," said the Birburi. "This is the Raja's daughter whom I have married as a reward for killing Bozomunda. He has given me half his kingdom from Sar Sarkar to the field of the cotton tree." Then Sahde Goala told him to go his way. So the Birburi and the Rani went on, and Sahde Goala caused a flooded river with the water flowing bank high to cross their path. As they waited on the bank, Sahde Goala made the Birburi an offer that, if he could carry the woman across the river without getting the sole of her foot wet, then she should belong to him, and if not, Sahde Goala should take her. The Birburi agreed, and tried again to get the Rani across without wetting her, but the flood was too strong. So at last he gave in, and Sahde Goala took her back with him to their former home. There they lived, and in the course of time Chandani Rani bore a son, and she named him Dhanantari. And after the birth of their son, the family became so wealthy, Dhan, that the Hindus revered Dhanantari as a god. And so ends the story. End of section 5. Section 6 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Raja's Son and the Merchant's Son. Once upon a time, the son of a Raja and the son of a merchant were great friends. They neither of them had any taste for lessons, but would play truant from school and waste their time running about the town. The Raja was much vexed at his son's behavior. He wished him to grow up a worthy successor to himself, and with this object did all he could to break off his friendship with the merchant's son, as the two boys only led each other into mischief. But all his efforts failed, and at last he offered a reward of 100 rupees to anyone who could separate them. One of the Raja's concubines made up her mind to earn the reward, and one day she met the two boys as they were going out to bathe. The Raja's son was walking ahead, and the merchant's son a little way behind. The woman ran after the merchant's son and threw her arms round him, and putting her lips to his ear, pretended to whisper to him and then ran away. When they met at the river, the prince asked the merchant's son what the woman had told him. His friend denied that she had said anything, but for all his protestations, the prince would not believe this. They quarrelled about it for a long time, and at last the prince went home in a rage and shut himself up in his room and refused to eat or be comforted. His father sent to inquire what was the matter with him, and the prince replied that food should not pass his lips until the merchant's son had been put to death. Thereupon the Raja sent for some soldiers and told them to devise some means of killing the merchant's son. So they bound the youth and showed him to the prince and said that they would take him to the jungle and kill and bury him there. They then led him off. But on the road they caught a lamb, and when they got to the jungle, they killed the lamb and steeped the clothes of the merchant's son in the blood, that they might have something to show to the prince, and then went back, leaving the boy in the jungle. They took the bloody cloth to the prince and told him to rise and eat. But when he saw the blood, all his friendship revived, and he was filled with remorse and could not eat for sorrow. Then the Raja told his soldiers to find out some friend to comfort the prince, and they told him that they would soon set things straight, and going off to the jungle brought back the merchant's son and took him to the prince, and the two youths forgot their differences and were as friendly as before. Time passed, and one day the prince proposed to his friend that they should run away and seek their fortunes in the world. So they fixed a day and stole away without telling anyone, and as they had not taken any money, they soon had to look about for employment. They found work, and the arrangement their masters made with them was this. Their wages were to be as much rice each day as would go on a leaf, and if they threw up their work, they were to forfeit one hand and 1 year. On the other hand, if their masters discharged them so long as they were willing to work for this wage, the master was to lose 1 hand and 1 ear. The merchant's son was cunning enough to turn this agreement to his advantage. For every day he brought a large lotus leaf to be filled with rice. This gave him more than he could eat, and he soon grew fat and flourishing. But the Raja's son only took an ordinary sal leaf to his master, and the rice that he got on this was not enough to keep him alive. So he soon wasted away and died. Now the merchant's son had told his master that his name was Ujar. One day his master said, "Ujar, go and hoe that sugar cane, and look sharp about it." So Ujar went, and instead of hoeing the ground, dug up all the sugar cane and piled it in a heap. When the master saw his fine crop destroyed, he was very angry and called the villagers to punish Ujar. But when they questioned him, Ujar protested that he was bound to obey his master's orders. He had been ordered to hoe the sugar cane, not the ground, and he had done as he was told, and so they had to let him off. Another day, a Hindu neighbor came to Ujar's master and asked him to lend his servant for a day. So Ujar went to the Hindu's house, and there was told to scrape and spin some hemp. But Ujar did not understand the Hindu language, and when he got the knife to scrape the hemp with, he proceeded to chop it all up into little pieces. When the Hindu saw what had happened, he was very angry and called in the neighbors. But Ujar protested that he had been told to cut the hemp and had done so, and so he got off. Ujar's master had an only child, and one day he told Ujar to take the child to a tank and give him a good washing. So Ujar took the child to a tank and there proceeded to dash the child against a stone in the way that washerwomen wash clothes. He knocked the child about until he knocked the life out of him, and then carefully washed him in the tank and brought the body home and put it on the bed. Next morning the father was surprised not to hear the child running about and, going to look, found a dead body. The villagers assembled, but Ujar protested that his master had told him to wash the child thoroughly, and he had only obeyed orders, so they had to let him off again. After this, the master made up his mind to get rid of Ujar, but he was in a fix. But he could not dismiss him because of the agreement that if he did not continue to employ him so long as he was willing to serve for 1 leafful of rice a day, he was to lose a hand and an ear. So he decided to kill him. But he was afraid to do so himself for fear of being found out. So he decided to send Ujar to his father-in-law's house and get them to do the job. He wrote a letter to his father-in-law, asking him to kill the bearer directly he arrived before many people knew of his coming, and this letter he gave to Ujjar to deliver. On the way, however, Ujjar had some misgivings, and he opened the letter and read it. Thereupon he tore it in pieces, and instead of it wrote a letter to his master's father-in-law, in which his master was made to say that Ujjar was a most valuable servant, and they should give him the youngest daughter in marriage as soon as possible. The fraud was not found out, and directly Ujjar arrived, he was married to the youngest daughter of his master's father-in-law. A few days later, the master went to see how his plan had worked and was disgusted to find Ujjar not only alive but happily married. So he thought that he would entice him into the jungle and kill him there. With this object, he one day invited Ujjar to come out hunting with him. But Ujjar suspected what was up and took a hatchet with him. And directly they got to the jungle, he fell behind his master and cut him down with his hatchet, and then went home and told his wife's relations that his master had got tired of hunting and had gone back to his own home. No doubts were raised about his story, and he lived on happily with his wife till he died at a ripe old age. End of section 6. Section 7 of the Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Poor Widow. Once there was a poor widow who had 2 children. She lived by daily labor, and if she got no work any day, then that day they had to go without food. One morning she went out to look for work, and a rich woman called her and asked if she wanted a job. She said, "Yes, that is what I am looking for." Then the rich woman said, "Stay here and pick the lice out of my hair, and I will pay you your usual wages and give you your dinner as well." So the poor widow agreed and spent the day picking out the lice, and at evening the rich woman brought out a measure of rice to give her as her wages, and, as she was measuring it, she felt her head itch, and she put up her hand and scratched and pulled out a large louse. Then she got very angry and scolded the widow and said that she would pay her nothing, as she had not done her work properly, and she turned her out. Then the widow was very unhappy, for she had nothing to give her starving children, and she wished that she had stuck to her usual work. When she got home and her children began to cry for food, she remembered that she had seen some wild saru, vegetable, growing in a certain place. So she took a basket and a sickle, and telling her children not to cry, went out to gather it. It was dark and lonely, and she felt frightened, but then she thought of her children and went on and gathered the saru, and returned home crying, because she had nothing better to give her offspring. On the way she met an old man, who asked her why she was crying, and she told him all her story. Then he told her to take the herbs home and chop them all up, and to put some in every basket and pot she had, and to cook the rest for supper. So when she got home, she did as she had been directed, and when she came to take the herbs which she had cooked out of the pot, she found that they had turned into rice, and she and her children ate it with joy. The next morning she found that every pot and basket into which she had put the herbs was full of rice, and from that time she prospered and bought goats and pigs and cattle and lived happily ever after. But no one knew where the old man came from, as she had forgotten to ask him. End of section 7. Section 8 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Monkey and the Girl. Once upon a time, the boys and girls of a village used to watch the crops of bud growing by a river, and there was a Hanuman monkey who wished to eat the bud, but they drove him away. So he made a plan. He used to make a garland of flowers and go with it to the field, and when he was driven away, he would leave the flowers behind. And the children were pleased with the flowers and ended by making friends with the monkey and did not drive him away. There was one of the young girls who was fascinated by the monkey and promised to marry him. Some of the other children told this in the village, and the girl's father and mother came to hear of it and were angry, and the father took some of the villagers and went and shot the monkey. Then they decided not to throw away the body, but to burn it like the corpse of a man. So they made a pyre and put the body on it and set fire to it. Just then the girl came and they told her to go away. But she said that she wished to see whether they really burned him like a man. So she stood by, and when the pyre was in full blaze, she called out, "Oh, look! What is happening to the stars in the sky?" At this everyone looked up at the sky. Then she took some sand which she had in the fold of her cloth and threw it into the air, and it fell into their eyes and blinded them. While they were rubbing the sand out of their eyes, the girl leapt onto the pyre and was burned along with the monkey and died a sati. Her father and brothers were very angry at this and said that the girl must have had a monkey's soul, and so she was fascinated by him. And so saying, they bathed and went home. End of section 8. Section 9 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. Ramai and the Animals. Once there was a blacksmith who had 5 sons, and the sons were always quarreling. The father used to scold them, but they paid no heed. So he got angry, and one day he sent for them and said, "You waste your time quarreling. I have brought you up and have amassed wealth. I should like to see what you are worth. I will put it to the test. I will give you each 100 rupees, and I will see how you employ the money. If any of you puts it to profitable use, I will call him my son. But if any of you squander it, I shall call him a girl." So they went forth with the money, and one bought buffaloes, and one bought horses, and another cattle, each according to his judgment, and brought them home. But the youngest son, who was named Ramai, soon after he started, found some men killing a cat, and he begged them not to kill the cat, but let him have it, and he bought it of them. And going on, he found some men killing a dog, which they had caught stealing, and he bought it of them to save its life. By and by he came to some men hunting an otter, and he asked what they were doing. And they said that the otter ate the fish in a Raja's tank, and so they were going to kill it. And he asked them to catch it and sell it to him, and promised to take it away where it could do no harm. And they did so. Then he went on and came to some men who were killing a young black snake, and he saved that also, and then returned home with his 4 animals. And he tethered the cat and the dog and the otter in the yard, and he put the snake into a pot with a lid on, and hung it in the cow shed. When his father saw Ramai's animals, he was very angry and jeered at him and said that he had no more mind than a woman. And especially he told him to throw away the snake at once, if he did not want it killed. So Ramai took down the pot with the snake in it, and the snake said, "Take me to my father and mother, and they will reward you. And when they ask what you would like, take nothing but the ring which is on my father's hand. It is a magic ring, and has the property that it will give you whatever you ask." So Ramai took the young snake to its home, and its father and mother were very grateful, and asked what reward he would accept. And he said he would take nothing but the ring, so they gave it to him. On the way home, he thought that he would test its virtues. So he bathed and spread out a cloth, and then prayed, "Oh, ring, give me some luncheon." And behold, he saw a nice lunch heaped up in the middle of the cloth. He ate it joyfully and went back home, and there he found that his father had killed the other animals, and he reproached him. But his father said, They were useless and were only eating their heads off. Why should I not kill them? Ramai answered, These were not useless. They were most valuable animals, much better than those my brothers bought. If you ask my brothers for a gold palace, they could not make you one, but I could do so at once, thanks to the snake, and I could marry a princess and get anything else I want. His father said that he would like to see him try. So Ramai asked the ring for a gold palace, and immediately one appeared in their garden. Then his father was very repentant about having killed the other animals. But Ramai's boast that he could marry a princess got abroad, and the Raja heard of it, and as he was glad to have so rich a son-in-law, he gave him his daughter in marriage. And with his daughter, the Raja sent elephants and horses. But Ramai sent them back again, lest it should be said that he had become rich through the bounty of the Raja, and by the virtue of the ring, they lived in wealthy and prosperity. End of section 9. Section 10 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Magic Bedstead. Once upon a time, a carpenter made a bedstead, and when it was ready, he put it in his veranda. At night, he heard the four legs of the bedstead talking together and saying, "We will save the life of anyone who sleeps on this bedstead and protect him from his enemies." When the carpenter heard this, he decided not to part with the bed for less than 100 rupees. So next day he went out to try and get this price for the bed. But people laughed at him and said that no one could pay such a price but the Raja. So he went to the Raja, and the Raja asked why he wanted 100 rupees for a bedstead that was apparently worth only 5 or 6 annas. The carpenter answered that the bed would protect its owner from all enemies. The Raja doubted at first, but as the man persisted in his story, he agreed to buy the bed. But he stipulated that if he found a story about it not to be true, he should take back his money. One night, the king lay awake on the bed, and he heard the legs of the bed talking. So he lay still and listened. And they said that the Raja was in danger, and that they must try to save him. So one leg loosened itself from the bed, and went away outside, and it found a tiger which had come to eat the Raja. And it bit the tiger to death, and then came back and fixed itself into its place again. Soon a second leg said that it would go outside. So it went, and that leg met a leopard and a bear, and bit them to death, and returned. Then the third leg said that it was its turn, and it went outside, and it found 4 burglars digging a hole through the wall of the palace, and it set upon them, and broke their legs, and left them lying there. When this one returned, the fourth leg went out, and it heard a voice in the sky saying, "The Raja is very cunning. I will send a snake which shall hide in his shoe, and when he puts the shoe on in the morning, it will bite him and he will die." When this leg came back, each one told the others what it had seen and done, and the Raja heard them and lay awake till morning. And at dawn he called his servants and sent them outside the palace, and there they found the tiger and leopard and bear lying dead, and the 4 thieves with their legs broken. Then the Raja believed what the legs had said, and he would not get up, but first ordered his servants to make a fire in the courtyard, and he had all his shoes thrown into the fire, and then he got up. After this, the Raja ordered that great care was to be taken of the bedstead, and that anyone who sat on it should be put to death. And he himself used not to sleep in it any more, but he kept it in his bedroom, that it might protect him. End of section 10. Section 11 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Ghormuhas. Ghormuhas have head like horses and bodies and arms like men, and their legs are shaped like men's, but they have only one leg each, and they eat human beings. One day, a young man named Somai was hunting a deer, and the deer ran away to the country of the Ghormuhas, and Somai pursued it. And the Ghormuhas caught him and took him home to eat. First they smoked him for 2 or 3 days, so that all the vermin were driven out of his body and clothes, and then they proceeded to fatten him. They fed him well every day on rice cooked with turmeric. Somai saw how they dealt with their other victims. They tied them hand and foot and threw them alive into a pot of boiling oil, and when they were cooked, they hung the bodies up in the doorway and would take a bite as they passed in and out. The liver and heart and brains they cooked separately. They used to eat their own parents also, for when a father or mother grew old, they would throw them onto the roof of the house, and when they rolled down and were killed, they would say to their friends, "The pumpkin growing on a roof has got ripe and fallen off and burst. Let us come and eat it." And then they had a feast. Somai saw all this and was very frightened. The Ghormuhas could run very fast, and they made Somai run a race with them every day, and their plan was that they would eat him when he was strong enough to beat them in the race. In the course of time, he came to beat them in running on the road. Then they said that they would make him run in the fields, and if he bet them there, they meant to eat him. Somai found out their plan, and he decided to try and run away. If he stayed, he would be eaten. So if they caught him when he tried to run away, he would be no worse off. So the first day they raced in the fields, Somai was winning, but he remembered and stopped himself and let himself be beaten that day. But he resolved to try and escape the next day, and the Ghormuhas had decided to eat him that day whatever happened. So when the race began, Somai set off towards the lower lands where the rice fields were embanked, and he jumped the embankments. But the Ghormuhas who pursued him could not jump well, and tumbled and fell, and thus he ran away to his own country and made good his escape. And it was he who told men what Ghormuhas are like and how they live. End of section 11. Section 12 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Boy Who Learnt Magic. Once upon a time, there was a Raja who had 7 wives, and they were all childless, and he was very unhappy at having no heir. One day, a Jogi came to the palace begging, and the Raja and his Ranis asked him whether he could say what should be done in order that they might have children. The Jogi asked what they would give him if he told them, and they said that they would give him anything that he asked for, and gave him a written bond to this effect. Then the Jogi said, "I will not take elephants or horses or money, but you shall give me the child which is born first, and any born afterwards shall be yours. Do you agree?" And the Ranis consulted together and agreed. "Then," said the Jogi, "this is what you must do. You must all go and bathe, and after bathing you must go to a mango orchard, and the Raja must choose a bunch of 7 mangoes and knock it down with his left hand and catch it in a cloth, without letting it touch the ground. Then you must go home, and the Ranis must sit in a row according to their seniority, and the Raja must give them each one of the mangoes to eat, and he must himself eat the rinds which the Ranis throw away, and then you will have children." And so saying, the Jogi went away, promising to return the next year. A few days later, the Raja decided to give a trial to the Jogi's prescription, and he and the Ranis did as they had been told. But the Raja did not eat the rind of the youngest Rani's mango. He did not love her very much. However, 5 or 6 months after, it was seen that the youngest Rani was with child, and then she became the Raja's favorite. But the other Ranis were jealous of her and reminded the Raja that he would not be able to keep her child. But when her time was full, she gave birth to twin sons, and the Raja was delighted to think that he would be able to keep the younger of the two, and he loved it much. When the year was up, the Jogi came and saw the boys, and he said that he would return when they could walk. And when they could run about, he came again and asked whether the Raja would fulfill his promise. The Raja said that he would not break his bond. Then the Jogi said that he would take the two boys, and when the Raja objected that he was only entitled to one, he said that he claimed both as they were born at the same time. But he promised that if he took both, he would teach them magic and then let one come back. And he promised also that all the Rani should have children. So the Raja agreed and sent away the boys with the Jogi. And with them he sent goats and sheep and donkeys and horses and camels and elephants and furniture of all sorts. The Jogi was called Sitari Jogi, and he was a Raja in his own country. But before they reached his country, all the animals died. First the goats, then the sheep, and the donkeys, and the horses, and the camels, and the elephants. And when the goats died, the boys lamented, "The goats have died, father. How far, father, is it to the country of the Sitari Jogi?" And so they sang when the other animals died. At last they reached the Jogi's palace, and every day he taught them incantations and spells. He bought them each a water pot and sent them every morning to fill it with dew. But before they collected enough, the sun came out and dried up the dew. One day they got a cupful, another day half a cupful, but they never were able to fill the pots. In the course of time they learnt all the spells the Jogi knew, and one day when they went out to gather dew, the younger boy secretly took with him a rag, and he soaked this in the dew, and then squeezed it into the pot, and so he soon filled it. And the elder boy, seeing his brother's pot full, filled his pot at a pool of water, and they took them to the Jogi. But the Jogi was not deceived by the elder boy, and told him that he would never learn magic thoroughly. But the younger boy, having learnt all that the Jogi knew, learnt more still from his friends, for all the people of that country knew magic. Then one day the Jogi took the two boys back to their home, and he told the Raja that he would leave the elder boy at home. The Raja wanted to keep the younger one, but the Jogi insisted, and the younger boy whispered to his mother not to mind, as he would soon come back by himself. So they let him go. The Jogi and the boy used to practice magic. The Jogi would take the form of a young man, and the boy would turn into a bullock, and the Jogi would go to a village and sell the bullock for a good price. But he would not give up the tethering rope, and then he would go away and do something with the tethering rope, and the boy would resume his shape again and run off to the Jogi. And when the purchasers looked for their bullock, they found nothing. And when they went to look for the seller, the Jogi would change his shape again, so that he could not be recognized. And in this way they deceived many people and amassed wealth. Then the Jogi taught the boy the spell he used with the rope. And when he had learned this, he asked to be taught the spell by which he could change his own shape without having a second person to work the spell with the rope. The Jogi said that he would teach him that later, but he must wait. Then the boy reproached the Jogi and said that he did not love him, and he went away to his friends in the town and learned the spell he wanted from them, so that he was able to change his shape at will. 2 or 3 days after, the boy again went to the Jogi and said, "Teach me the spell about which I spoke to you the other day." And the Jogi refused. "Then," said the boy, "I shall go back to my father, for I see that you do not love me." At this the Jogi grew wrathful and said that if they away, he would kill him. So the boy at this ran away in terror, and the Jogi became a leopard and pursued him. Then the boy turned himself into a pigeon, and the Jogi became a hawk and pursued him. So the boy turned himself into a fly, and the Jogi became a paddy bird and pursued him. The fly alighted on the plate of a Rani who was eating rice, and the Jogi took on his natural shape and told the Rani to scatter the rice which she was eating on the ground, and she did so. But the boy turned himself into a bead of coral on the necklace which the Rani was wearing, and the Jogi did not notice this, but became a pigeon and ate up the rice which the Rani had thrown down. When he did not find the boy among the rice, he turned himself into a jogi again and saw him in the necklace. Then he told the Rani to break her necklace and scatter the beads on the ground, and she did so. Then the jogi again became a pigeon and began to pick up the beads. But the boy turned himself into a cat and hid under the veranda, and when the pigeon came near, he pounced on it and killed it and ran outside with it. Then he became a boy again and twisted off the bird's head and wrapped it in his cloth and went off home. And looking behind, he saw the jogi's head come rolling after him. So when he came to a blacksmith's fire by the side of the road, he threw the pigeon's head into it, and then the jogi's head also ran into the fire and was consumed. And the boy went home to his parents. End of section 12. Section 13 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Charitable Jogi. Once there was a very poor man with a large family, and when his eldest son grew up, he tried to arrange a marriage for him. He selected a bride and arranged matters with her relations, but then he found that he had no money to pay for the performance of the marriage ceremonies. So he tried to borrow from his friends and from money lenders, but no one would lend him anything. So he proposed to the bride's relatives to only have the betrothal that year and the marriage the year after. But they would not agree and said that the marriage must be then or never. Just then a jogi came to his house to beg, and he told the jogi all about his difficulties and asked for help. The jogi took pity on him and gave him 20 rupees, which was all that he had collected by begging. Now this jogi had 2 wives at home, and he thought that he would get a poor reception from them if he returned empty-handed. So he picked up 2 stones and wrapped them up in 2 pieces of cloth. And when he reached home, his wives welcomed him and brought out a bed for him to sit on and asked about his adventures. And when they saw the bundles, they wished to know what was inside, and they opened them before him, and behold, the stones had turned into gold. When the jogi saw this, he wished that he had picked up 3 or 4 stones instead of only 2, and he understood that Chando had given him the gold because he helped the poor man. This is why no money lender will refuse a loan if one is asked for the performance of a marriage, and money so borrowed is always paid back punctually. When the jogi came back the next year, the poor man paid him the 20 rupees. End of section 13. Section 14 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. Chote and Mote. Once upon a time there were 2 brothers, Chote and Mote. They were poor but very industrious, and they got tired of working as hired laborers in their own village. So they decided to try their luck elsewhere. They went to a distant village, and Chote took service with an oilman and Mote with a potter on a yearly agreement. Chote had to drive the oil mill in the morning, and then after having his dinner to feed the mill bullock and take it out to graze. But the bullock, having had a good meal of oil cake, would not settle down to graze alone, but kept running after all the herds of cattle it saw. And Chote had to spend his whole time running after it till he was worn out, and he was very soon sorry that he had taken up such hard service, and was quite resolved to not stay on after his year was up. Mote was no better off. The potter overworked him, making him carry water and dig earth from morn to night, and for all he did, he got nothing but abuse. One day the brothers met, and Mote asked Chote how he was getting on. Chote answered, "Oh, I have got a capital place. All the morning I sit at my ease on the oil mill, and then I have a good dinner, and take the bullock out to graze, and as it has had a good meal of oil cake, it lies down without giving any trouble, and I sit in the shade and enjoy myself." Then Mote said, "I am pretty lucky too. I have to fetch 3 or 4 pots of water, then I have my dinner and a rest, and then I have to dig earth and knead it. Still, I cannot say that I have so little work as you. Will you change with me for 3 or 4 days, so that I may have a rest?" Chote gladly agreed, and each brother thought that he had got the better of the other. In the morning, while Mote was driving the oil mill, he was very pleased with his new job, and when he had to take the bullock out to graze, he took a bedstead with him to lie on. But directly the bullock got outside the village, it rushed off bellowing towards some other cattle, and Mote had to run after it with his bedstead on his head. And all the afternoon the bullock kept him running about till he was worn out. Meanwhile Chote was no better off. His unaccustomed shoulders were quite bruised with constantly carrying water. At the potter's house was a custard apple tree, and it was believed that there was money buried at the foot of the tree. So as Chote was a stranger, the potter told him to water the earth by the tree to soften it, as it was used for pottery. Chote softened the earth and dug it, and as he dug, he uncovered pots of rupees. So he covered them up again and dug the earth elsewhere. And at evening he went and proposed to Mote to run away with the money. So at midnight they went and dug it up and ran off home. As they were not pursued, they felt safe after a month or 2. So they spent the money in buying land and cattle, and their cultivation prospered, and they became quickly rich. End of section 14. Section 15 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Daydreamer. Once an oilman was going to market with his pots of oil arranged on a flat basket, and he engaged a Santal for 2 annas to carry the basket. And as he went along, the Santal thought, "With 1 anna I will buy food, and with the other I will buy chickens. And the chickens will grow up and multiply, and then I will sell some of the fowls and eggs, and with the money I will buy goats. And when the goats increase, I will sell some and buy cows, and then I will exchange some of the calves for she-buffaloes. And when the buffaloes breed, I will sell some and buy land and start cultivation. And then I will marry and have children, and I will hurry back from work in the fields, and my wife will bring me water, and I will have a rest, and my children will say to me, 'Father, be quick and wash your hands for dinner.' But I will shake my head and say, 'No, no, not yet.'" And as he thought about it, he really shook his head, and the basket fell to the ground, and all the pots of oil were smashed. Then the oilman abused him and said that he must pay 2 rupees for the oil and 1 anna for the pots. But the Santal said that he had lost much more than that, and the oilman asked him how that could be. And the Santal explained how with his wages he was going to get fowls and then goats and then oxen and buffaloes and land, and how he came to spill the basket. And at that the oilman roared with laughter and said, "Well, I have made up the account, and I find that our losses are equal, so we will cry quits." And so saying, they went their ways laughing. End of section 15. Section 16 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Extortionate Sentry. There was once a sentry outside the Raja's palace who would let no one go in to sell anything to the Raja until they promised to give him half the price they received from the Raja. And the poor traders had to promise, for their livelihood depended on selling their goods. One day a fisherman caught an enormous fish, and he thought that if he took it to the Raja, he would get a big price for it. So he went off to the palace. But when he came to the gate, the sentry stopped him and would not let him go in, until he promised to give him half of what he got. And after some argument, he had to promise. So he was admitted to the Raja's presence, and when the Raja asked what was the price of the fish, the fisherman said, 100 blows with a stick. The Raja was very astonished and asked the meaning of such a request. Then the fisherman said that the sentry had extorted a promise that he should get half the price, and he wanted him to get 50 blows. At this the Raja was very angry, and he had the sentry beaten with 100 stripes and dismissed him. End of section 16. Section 17 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Broken Friendship. Once upon a time there was a Raja and his Diwan, and they each had a son. And the two boys were great friends. And when they grew old enough, they took to hunting, and when they became young men, they were so devoted to the sport that they spent their whole time in pursuit of game. They followed every animal they could find until they killed it, and they shot every bird in the town. The parents were much distressed at this, for they thought that if the boys spent all the time together hunting, they would grow up unruly and ignorant. So they made up their minds that they must separate the young men so that they would not be tempted to spend so much time in sport, but would be able to learn something useful. They scolded the youths and told them to give up their friendship and their hunting, but this had no effect. Then the Raja told the villagers that he would reward anyone who would break up the friendship, and the villagers tried their best but effected nothing. There was, however, an old woman in the village who one day said, "If the Raja gave me 10 rupees, I would soon put a stop to their friendship." This came to the ears of the Raja, and he exclaimed, "What is 10 rupees to me? Bring the old man to me, and I will give her 10 rupees, if she can put an end to this friendship." So the old woman was brought trembling before the Raja, and on being questioned, undertook to break up the friendship if she were properly rewarded. And when this was promised, she asked for 2 men to be given to her, and she took them to her house, and there she made them sling a bed on a pole, such as is used for carrying a man on a journey, and she hung curtains all round it, and drew them close, and inside, on an old winnowing fan, they put some rotten manure from a dunghill. Then she made the 2 men take up the bed, and she fetched a drum, and she paraded all through the bazaar, beating the drum with the bed following behind her. She told the 2 carriers not to answer any questions as to what was in the bed. Thus they passed out of the town and went in the direction in which the 2 young men had gone hunting. When these heard the sound of the drum and saw the 2 men carrying the bed, they ran up to see what it was, and told the carriers to put it down that they might look inside. So the bed was put on the ground, and the Raja's son peeped inside the curtain. But as he caught the smell, he jumped back, and the Diwan's son asked what was the matter, and he said, "It stinks. It is dung." The Diwan's son would not believe him, and also looked to convince himself. Then they both asked what the meaning of this was. The old woman said that she would explain the meaning of it, but only to one of them, and the one who had heard could tell the other. So she made the carriers take away the bed, and she called the Raja's son aside. "Come, I will tell you what it means." Then she put her arms around the neck of the Raja's son, and put her lips to his ear, and pretended to whisper to him. But really she said nothing. Then she let him go and followed the carriers. The Diwan's son at once ran to his friend, and asked what the old woman had told him. The Raja's son answered, She told me nothing at all. She only pretended to whisper. The Divan's son would not believe this, and pressed him to tell, saying, "We have been friends for so long, and have had no secrets from each other. Why won't you tell me this? If you refuse to tell me, there is an end of our friendship." But the Raja's son persisted that he had been told nothing, and proposed that they should go and ask the old woman if it were not so. But the Divan's son said that that was no good, because the old woman and the Raja's son had plainly made a plot to keep him in the dark. The quarrel grew hotter and hotter, till at last they parted in anger, and each went to his own home, and from that time their friendship was broken. And being separated, they gave up hunting and took to useful pursuits. Thus the old woman earned her reward from the Raja. End of section 17. Section 18 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. A story told by a Hindoo. Once upon a time there was a Raja who had 2 sons, and after their father's death they divided a kingdom between them. The 2 brothers were inveterate gamblers and spent their time playing cards with each other. For a long time fortune was equal, but one day it turned against the elder brother, and he lost and lost until his money and his jewelry, his horses and his elephants, and everything that he had been won by his younger brother. Then in desperation he staked his share in the kingdom, and that too he lost. Then the younger brother sent drummers through the city to proclaim that the whole kingdom was his. The shame of this was more than the elder prince could bear, so he resolved to quit the country, and he told his wife of his intention, and bade her to stay behind. But his faithful wife refused to be parted from him. She vowed that he had married her not for one day, nor for 2, but for good and all, and that where he went, there she would go, and whatever troubles he met, she would share. So he allowed her to come with him, and the 2 set off to foreign parts. After some time their path led them through an extensive jungle, and after travelling through it for 2 days, they at last lost their way completely. Their food gave out. They were faint with starvation and torn with briars. The prince urged his wife to return, but she would not hear of it. So they pushed on, supporting life on jungle fruits. Sometimes the prince would go far ahead, for his faithful wife could only travel slowly, and then he would return and wait for her. At last he got tired of leading her on, and made up his mind to abandon her. At night they lay down at the foot of a tree, and the prince thought, "If wild animals would come and eat us, it would be the best that could happen. I cannot bear to see my wife suffer any more. Although her flesh is torn with thorns, she will not leave me. I will leave her here. May wild beasts kill both her and me, but I cannot see her die before my eyes." So thinking, he got up quietly and went off as quickly as he could. When the princess woke and found that she had been abandoned, she began to weep and wept from dawn to noon without ceasing. At noon a being, in the guise of an old woman, appeared and asked her why she wept, and comforted her, and promised to lead her out of the wood, and told her that Chandu had had compassion on her, and would allow her to find her husband again if they both lived. So saying, the old woman led the princess from the forest, and showed her the way to a great city where a Raja lived. The princess went begging her way through the city to the Raja's palace, and there they engaged her as a servant. Now her husband had also escaped from the jungle, and sought employment as a labourer, but no one would give him work for more than a day or 2. And at last his search for work brought him to the city in which the princess was, and there he was engaged as a groom in the palace stables. The prince had changed his name, and he had no chance of knowing that his wife was in the palace, because she was confined to the women's apartments. So some years passed without their having news of each other. At last one day, the princess happened to go onto the roof and looking down at the stables, saw and thought she recognized her husband. Then she leaned over and listened till she heard his voice, and at that she was sure that it was he. So she hastened to the Raja and begged to be allowed to meet her husband, and the Raja sent to call the sais with the name which the princess had given, but no one came, for the prince would not reveal himself. Then the princess told their story and how her husband had gambled away his half of the kingdom. The Raja ordered anyone with such a history to come forward, as his wife was in the palace, but the prince did not reveal himself. Then the princess said, "Let all the saises cook rice and bring me a bit of each man's cooking to taste." They did so, and when she tasted the rice cooked by her husband, she at once said that it was his. Her husband was unable to deny it and admitted everything. Then they took him away from his work in the stables and let him live with his wife. After a time, the Raja wrote to the younger brother, asking whether he would restore the half of the kingdom which he had won, and the younger brother answered that he would gladly do so, if his brother would sign an agreement never to gamble any more. It was with this object in view, and to teach him the folly of his ways, that he had dispossessed him. The elder brother gladly gave the required promise, and returned to his kingdom with his faithful wife, and lived happily ever afterwards. End of section 18. Section 19 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Raibar and the Leopard. Once upon a time, a Raibar was going backwards and forwards between two families, arranging a marriage, and part of the road which he used to travel ran through a forest. One day, as he was going to the bride's house, he took a sack with him, intending to try and get the loan of some Indian corn from the bride's relations. But as he was passing through the piece of jungle, he suddenly met a leopard. He was terribly frightened, but collecting his wits, he addressed the animal thus: "Leopard, I beg you not to eat me. I am engaged on a work of great merit. I am making 2 men out of 1. This address amazed the leopard, and he at once asked the Raibar whether he would make him into 2, and promised that if he could, his life should be spared. The Raibar answered readily, "Seeing that in pursuit of my profession I have made 2 men out of 1 all over the country, of course I can make you into 2 leopards if I try. All you have to do is to get into this sack and keep quiet. If you utter a sound, you will spoil the charm." "Well," said the leopard, "I will try and see. I undertake to keep quite quiet, and if you are successful, I promise to tell the whole race of leopards to spare the lives of Raibars." So saying, the leopard jumped into the sack and allowed the man to tie him up tightly in it. No sooner was it done than the Raibar took the sack on his head and carried it to the bank of a river, and having given it 2 or 3 hearty whacks with his stick, threw it into the water. The sack went floating down the stream, and it happened that lower down a leopardess sat watching the water, and when she saw the sack coming along, she thought that it was a dead cow floating down. So when it came near, she jumped into the water and pulled it ashore. She then proceeded to tear open the sack, when out jumped the first leopard. He soon explained how he came to be in the sack, and declared that the Raibar's promise had been fulfilled, and that she was his destined mate. The leopardess agreed, and the 2 set to work to tell all the other leopards what had happened, and what a kindness the Raibar had done them. And so it came to pass that to the present day leopards never interfere with Raibars when they are going about arranging a marriage. No one ever heard of one being injured. Meanwhile, the Raibar went on his way rejoicing at having rid himself of the leopard. But the next year, while engaged on the business of another marriage, the Raibar was passing through the same jungle when he came face to face with the very leopard that he thought he had safely disposed of. He at once took to his heels, but the leopard called out to him not to be afraid and to wait, as he had something to say to him. So the Raibar stopped, and the leopard asked whether he did not recognize him. The Raibar stoutly denied all knowledge of him. "Well," said the leopard, "I am the leopard of whom you made two out of one, and to show my gratitude, I will give you any reward you like. Would you like a cow, or a deer, or any other animal? I will kill you one and bring it to you." When the Raibar saw the turn that things had taken, he thought that he had better take advantage of it. So he asked for a good large nilgai. The leopard told him to come to a certain tree at noon the next day, and he would find the animal there. So they separated, and the next day at noon the Raibar went to the tree and found a fine nilgai waiting for him, which he and his friends took home and ate with joy. End of section 19. Section 20 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Ungrateful Snake. There was once a Raja and his Diwan, and they each had one son. These sons were married in infancy, but as they grew up, they never heard anything about their having been married. When the boys reached manhood and found no arrangements being made for their weddings, they began to wonder at the delay and often talked about it. And in the end, they agreed to run away to another country. Soon after this resolve of theirs, some horse dealers came to their home with horses to sell. The two youths at once saw that if they could each have a horse and learn to ride it, it would be easy for them to run away from home. So they hurried to their fathers and begged them to buy them each one of the beautiful horses which the dealers had brought. The Raja and the Diwan did not like to disappoint their sons, so they bought the horses, to the great delight of the boys, who used to ride them every day. One day the Raja's son was out riding by himself, and he passed by a tank where a number of women and girls were bathing and drawing water. As he came galloping along, the women ran back in a fright, and as they could not draw their water while he was there, an old woman came up to him and told him to go away and not stay making eyes at the girls as if he had no wife of his own. "What wife have I?" said the prince. "I know nothing of being married." "You were married sure enough when you were an infant," replied the old woman. "Your wife is still in her father's house, but now that you have grown up, they will probably bring her home to you this year." Then the prince asked where his wife lived, and having learned the name of the village, he galloped off home and at once began to question his mother about his marriage. His mother told him that they intended to have the bride brought home that year. But the prince was impatient and proposed that he should go off at once to his father-in-law's and see his wife, and try to persuade them to let her come back with him without any ceremony. His mother made no objection, so he got ready for the journey and started off on horseback. He had not gone far when he saw a field of thatching grass on fire, and in the middle, surrounded by the flames, was a huge poisonous snake, unable to escape. As the prince rode by, the snake called out to him, "Prince, you are going joyously to bring home your bride, and here I am in danger of being burned alive. Will you not have pity on me and save me? If you do, I will confer a boon on you." "But if I save you," objected the prince, "you will only eat me. Snakes do not know what gratitude is." "I am not of that kind," answered the snake. "Here I am in danger of death. I beseech you to have pity on me." These pleadings prevailed, and the prince got off his horse and bet out the fire, and then spread a cloth over the embers so that the snake could crawl out. When the snake was safe, the prince asked for the boon that had been promised him. "No boon will you get," said the snake. "You did a foolhardy thing in saving me, for now I am going to eat you, and you cannot escape from me." The prince saw that there was little hope for him, but he begged the snake to allow 2 or 3 judges to decide whether it was fair that he should be killed after what he had done. The snake agreed to this, provided that the judges were not human beings. He was willing to be bound by the opinions of anyone else. They set out together to look for judges, and soon saw a herd of cattle resting under a banyan tree by a pool of water. So they agreed to make these their judges. Then the prince explained to one of the cows and the banyan tree and the water what they were to decide, whether it was fair for the snake, whose life he had saved, now to want to kill him. The banyan tree was the first to answer. It said, "You did good to the snake, and your wages for doing good are evil. You saved his life, and he will now kill you. This is fair. This is the justice we have learned from human beings. You enjoy the shade of us trees, and in return you lop off our branches and sit on them, and do us all manner of injury. It is right that the snake should eat you." Then the prince turned to the cow. "He may eat you," answered the cow. "The tree is right. See how men treat cattle. You drive away our calves from us, and take our milk, and you beat us, and make us work hard. For all this ill treatment, the snake shall eat you." Then the prince asked the water what it had to say. "I agree with the other 2, said the water. "To return evil for good is the justice of mankind. It is by drinking water that your very lives are preserved. Yet you spit into it and wash dirty things in it. Shall not the snake return you evil for good?" So the judgment was delivered, and the snake wanted to eat the prince. But the prince asked the tree and the cow and the water to listen while he made one prayer. He told them how he had been married when he was too young to know anything about it, and how he was going for the first time to see his wife when this misfortune befell him. So he begged that he might be allowed to go and see his bride and then be eaten on his way back. The banyan tree asked what the snake thought about this proposal, and the snake said that it would make no objection if the tree and the cow and the water would be sureties for the return of the prince within 3 days. So the prince promised them faithfully that he would return, and they let him go. The prince rode on to his father-in-law's house, and when he arrived, a bed was brought out for him to sit on, and he was asked where he came from. When he explained who he was, they at once brought water and washed his feet, and then gave him oil and the toothstick, and took him to bathe. Then they brought him curds and dried rice to eat, and afterwards killed a goat, and made a feast, and showed him every honor. That evening, as his wife was rubbing his arms and legs, the prince remained silent and downcast, and showed none of the joy of a bridegroom. And when his bride asked what was the matter, he told her that he had only come to see her for 1 day, and that afterwards she must try and forget all about him. At first he would not tell her more, but when she urged him, he told her how he had to go and surrender himself to the snake on the next day. When she heard this, she vowed that she would go with him and die with him. The next morning came, and the prince said that he must return, and his wife said that she was going with him. So they made everything ready and set out on their way. When they came within sight of the banyan tree where the prince was to be killed, he tried to turn his wife back, but though he used force, she refused to leave him and said that she would first see him killed and then go home. So at last he let her accompany him. When they reached the tree, she asked to be allowed to go in front and be the first to meet the snake. To this the prince assented. They had not gone far when they saw the snake awaiting them in the path with its crest raised, and when they drew near, the prince's bride begged the snake to eat her first, as she had nowhere to live if she survived her husband. The snake refused and bade her go home to her parents. She said that that was impossible. They had sold her, and the prince had bought her, in life and in death, bones and ashes. But the snake would not listen and made for the prince to eat him. His wife, however, kept in front of the snake and would not let it pass. She called the banyan tree to witness that the snake should not eat her husband without first killing her. Without her husband, she would have no one to support her. Then the snake promised to teach her an incantation by means of which she could support herself. So saying, the snake conferred some magic powers upon and taught her an incantation, and promised her that if she took some dust in her hand and repeated the incantation and then blew on the dust, any person on whom she sprinkled the dust would at once be burned to ashes. Then the prince's wife asked how she should restore the people to life, and the snake taught her that also. But she was not satisfied, and said that she must at once try to see whether the snake was deceiving her or no. So the snake bade her experiment on a taro tree which grew near. Thereupon she gathered up some dust and repeated the incantation, and blew on it, and suddenly threw it over the snake, which at once turned to ashes, and that was the end of the snake. Then the prince and his wife went on their way rejoicing, and he was filled with wonder at the way in which his bride had saved him by persisting in going with him. End of section 20. Section 21 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Tiger's Bride. One day, a woman went to cut thatching grass, and she cut such a quantity that when she tied it up, the bundle was too big for her to lift onto her head. So she stood and called for someone to help her, but no one was within hearing, and no one came. She called, and at last began to promise that she would give her daughter in marriage to anyone who would help her. After she had called out this a few times, a tiger suddenly appeared and asked what she wanted. She explained her difficulty, and the tiger undertook to lift the load onto her head, if she would really give him her daughter in marriage. She promised, and with the help of the tiger took up the bundle and went home. 2 or 3 days after, the tiger presented himself at her house and was duly married to the daughter. After the wedding, the couple started for the tiger's home. All the way the unhappy bride wept and sang, "How far off is our home, Big Head?" "You can just see the mouth of the cave," answered the tiger, and in a short time they came to a large cave. Then the tiger told her to set to work and cook a feast while he went off and invited his friends to come and share it. But the bride, when left alone, caught a cat and killed it and hung it over the fire, so that its blood dropped slowly into the pan and made a fizzling noise, as if cooking were going on. and then she ran off to her mother's house and climbed a tree which grew near it and began to sing. You married me to a tiger. You threw me to a bear. Take back the necklace you gave me. Take back the bracelet and the diamonds and the coral. Meanwhile, the tiger returned with his friends and sat down outside the cave and told his wife to be quick with the cooking of the cakes, for he heard the hissing over the fire and thought that she was cooking. At last, as she did not come out, he got tired of waiting and went in to fetch her. Then he saw that she had disappeared and had to go and tell his friends. They were very angry at being cheated out of a feast and fell upon the tiger and beat him, till he ran away and was seen no more. But his bride was left to flit from tree to tree singing, You married me to a tiger. You threw me to a bear. Take back the necklace you gave me. Take back the bracelet and the diamonds and the coral. End of section 21. Section 22 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Killing of the Tiger. They say that there was a time when all living things had a common speech, and animals and men could understand each other. And in those days, there was a man-eating tiger which infested a jungle through which a high road ran. It preyed on people passing along the road till no one ventured to travel. And as the country was so unsafe, the people went in a body to the Raja and told him of the ravages of the tiger and asked him to send a force of soldiers to hunt and shoot it. So the Raja called together all his soldiers and promised to give half his kingdom to any of them who would kill the tiger. But not one of them was brave enough to make the attempt. They said that their business was to fight men and not tigers and leopards. Then the Raja extended his offer to all his subjects, and the petitioners went home to consult about it. And the news was published that the Raja would give half his kingdom to the slayer of the tiger. Now there was a poor man who was a very brave shikari of big game, and cunning into the bargain, and he offered to go and kill the tiger. They questioned him carefully, and when they saw that he was in earnest, they took him to the Raja to hear from the Raja's lips what his reward should be. And the Raja promised him half his kingdom, and wrote a bond to that effect, for he thought that the tiger would surely kill the man. Then the shikari said that he would start the next morning and return the next day, either with the dead tiger or with bits of its ear and claws to show that he had killed it. The Raja told the people to watch carefully and see that the shikari did not cheat by taking the claws and ears of a tiger with him. The next morning, the shikari started off, and all he took with him was a looking-glass and 3 pictures of a tiger drawn on 3 pieces of paper and a hatchet. He went to the road which the tiger frequented and climbed a banyan tree and spent the night in it. The tiger did not pass by at all that night, but in the morning it appeared and called out, "Who is up in the tree?" The shikari said, "It is I." "Come down quickly," said the tiger. "I have been looking for you." "Wait a minute," answered the shikari. "I have been looking for you also." "What for?" said the tiger. "Tell me first why you are looking for me," said the man. "To eat you," answered the tiger. Then the man said, "Well, I have been hunting for you to catch you and take you away. I have caught 3 or 4 like you, and if you don't believe me, let me get down and I will show you." The tiger got into a fright and said, "Come down and show me." So the shikari climbed down and uncovered his looking glass and told the tiger to look, and he reflected in the glass the pictures of the tigers which he had brought and said, "Now I am going to catch you and put you in here also." The tiger asked why he was to be caught, and the shikari said that it was because he had made the road unsafe by killing travelers. Then the tiger begged and prayed to be let off and promised that he would never kill any travelers again. At last the shikari said that he would let him go if he would allow him to cut off his claws and the tips of his ears and the tip of his tongue as a pledge of his good faith. The tiger said, "Well, you may cut off one claw from each foot and the very tip of my ears and tongue." So the shikari cut them off with his hatchet and, after again warning the tiger, went back home, and then presented himself with all his friends before the Raja, and the Raja gave him the promised reward. But the tiger's tongue festered and, after roaring with pain for a whole day, it died. End of section 22. Section 23 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Dream. One night, as a man and his wife lay talking in bed, the woman told her husband that she had dreamt that in a certain place she had dug up a pot full of rupees, and she proposed that they should go and look for it and see whether the dream was true. While they talked, it chanced that some thieves, who had climbed onto the roof, overheard the conversation and at once decided to forestall the others. So they went off to the place which the woman had described and began to dig. And after digging a little, they were delighted to come on a pot with a lid on. But when they took off the lid, an enormous snake raised its head and hissed at them. At this the thieves cursed the woman who had misled them, and agreed to take the snake and drop it through the roof onto the man and his wife as they lay in bed. So they shut the snake up again and carried it off to the house, and, making a hole in the thatch, dropped it through. But as it fell, the snake changed into a stream of money, which came rattling down on the couple below. The thieves found a snake, but it was not a real snake. It was Thakur, and it was his will to give the money to the man and his wife. When these two had recovered from their astonishment, they gathered up the money and lived in wealth ever afterwards. End of section 23. Section 24 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The King of the Bhuyans. There was once a king of the Bhuyans, and near his palace was a village of Santals. He was a kind ruler, and both Santals and Bhuyans were very happy under his sway. But when he died, he was succeeded by his son, who was a very severe master, and soon fell out with the Santals. If he found any cattle or buffaloes grazing anywhere near his crops, he had the cowherds beaten severely, so that no one dared to take the cattle in that direction. The Santals were very angry at this, and longed to get even with the Raja. They planned to turn the cattle into the Raja's crops at night, when no one could see them or catch them, but in the end their courage failed them. One year, after the rice had been cut, but before the millet crop was gathered, the youths and maidens of the Santal village had a dance, and danced all night till nearly morning. Then they agreed that it was not worthwhile to go to bed, and they had better take the cattle out to graze at once. After grazing their cattle, the cattle all collected at the midday resting place, and the cowherds were so sleepy after their night's dancing that they fell fast asleep on the bare ground. After a time, the buffaloes began to move again, and seeing a nice field of millet belonging to the Raja, soon made their way to it and grazed the whole field down. The Raja happened to pass that way and was filled with wrath at the sight. He had at once ordered his Sipahis to go and beat the cowherds within an inch of their lives, and so the Sipahis ran to the place with sticks. Their approach roused the sleeping cowherds, who jumped up and ran off home as hard as they could, all but the servant of the village Paramanik, assistant headman. He did not run away, but went to drive the cattle out of the field. He knew that this was his duty to his master, and he was resolved to do his duty, even at the cost of his life. As all the other boys had got away, the Sipahis turned their attention to him. But as they aimed blows at him with the sticks, he caught the blows on his arms, and the sticks shivered to atoms without harming him. So then they went to kick him, but a great Sabai snake came rustling up behind them. So they saw it was no use to contend with him and desisted, whereupon he drove all the village cattle home in triumph. The Sipahis reported to the Raja how the cowherds had all made good their escape, and how the Paramanik's herd boy had driven off the cattle. Then the Raja told them to go that afternoon at the time the cattle were brought home for the night, and wait at the end of the village street, and then give the cowherds the thrashing they deserved. The Sipahis did as they were ordered, and that evening waited for the returning herd boys, and caught them as they came home, and thrashed them within an inch of their lives. The others were all left senseless on the ground, but the Sipahis did not dare to lay hands on the Paramanik's herd boy. He drove the cattle back into the village, and told the villagers what had been done to their sons. The villagers went out with beds and carried the wounded boys home. Then they assembled and resolved to go and punish the Raja. So they went to him and asked what he meant by killing their children. "Dear me," said the Raja, "are they really dead?" "Well, if not quite dead, they are very ill," was the answer. "I am sorry," said the Raja. "I admit that I have done wrong, but if you will forgive me this time, I will undertake to cure them in a minute and make them as well as ever. Go and fetch them here." So the Santals went off to fetch the wounded cowherds and carried them to the Raja, all lying senseless on beds, and put them down before him. While they were away, the Raja had told his Sipahis to grind some good hot chilies, and when the cowherds were brought to him, he told the Sipahis to thrust the chili paste up their noses. This was done, and the smarting soon made the cowherds jump up and run away in a very lively fashion. And that was the way the Raja kept his word and cured them. End of section 24. Section 25 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. The Foolish Sons. There was once a man of the blacksmith caste who had 6 sons. The sons were all married, and the whole family lived together. But the sons' wives took to quarrelling, and at last the sons went to their parents and proposed that they should set up separate households, as the women folk could not live in peace. The blacksmith and his wife did not like the idea at all, and pointed out that it would be most inadvisable, while, so far, there was plenty of food and clothing for all. They would find it much more expensive to have 7 separate households and split up what was quite enough so long as they lived together. And what was to become of their old parents, who were now too old to work. The sons protested that they would support their father and mother as long as they lived, even though the family separated. At last, the old man said that he would put them to the test and see whether they were clever enough to manage their own affairs and smart enough to cheat people into giving them what they wanted. "I will see," said he, "how you would manage to support the family in time of famine or if we fell into poverty. I and your mother have managed to bring up a large family, and you know nothing of the anxiety that it has cost us. You have merely had to enjoy yourselves and eat your meals. If you insist on it, I will let you separate, but don't blame me afterwards. However, tomorrow I will take you on a journey and find some means of testing your cleverness." So the next morning they made ready for the journey. Their father only allowed them to take one meal of rice tied up in their clothes, and he gave each of them one pice, which he said was their inheritance. They set off, and after travelling some way, they sat down and ate up their rice, and then went on again. By the middle of the afternoon, they began to feel hungry. So the father proposed their going to a bazaar which was in sight. But between them and the bazaar was a channel of stagnant water, very deep, and with its surface covered by a coating of weeds. They tried to cross, but directly they set foot on it, they sank through the weeds, and it was too deep for wading. So their father said they would all camp on the bank, and he would see whether they were clever enough to get across the channel and bring food for a meal. If they could do that, he would believe that they could support their families in time of famine. So the old man spread his cloth on the ground and sat down and watched them try their luck one by one. The eldest brother first jumped up to try, but he could not cross the channel. Every time he tried, he sank through the weeds. At last he gave up in despair and admitted that he could not feed the party. Then the other brothers all tried in turn and failed. At last it came to the turn of the youngest. He modestly said that he was not likely to succeed where his elders had failed, but he would have a try. So he went to the edge of the water and, spreading out his cloth on the weeds, lay down on it so that his weight was distributed. In this position, the weeds supported him, and he managed to wriggle himself across on his face to the other side. Once across, he went to the bazaar, and going to a shop, began to talk with the shopkeeper. After a little, he asked for the loan of an anna. The shopkeeper said that he could not lend to a stranger. The blacksmith's son gave the name of some village as his home and pressed for the loan, promising to pay him 1 anna as interest within a week, and pulling out his pice, he said, "See here, I will pay you this pice as part of the interest in advance." At this the shopkeeper suffered himself to be persuaded and lent him the anna. With this, the blacksmith's son went off to a second shop and begged for the loan of 4 annas, as he had pressing need of it. He promised to pay an anna a week interest, and to pay down at once the interest for the first week. After some hesitation, the shopkeeper was deceived into lending the 4 annas. Then he went off to another shop and borrowed a rupee by promising to pay 8 annas a month as interest and putting down 4 annas as advance. Then he went to a Marwari's shop and asked for the loan of 10 rupees. The Marwari asked for interest at the rate of 1 rupee a day. The blacksmith's son protested that that was too high, but offered to pay 1 rupee every 2 days and to pay 1 rupee of interest in advance. The Marwari hesitated, but after being given a name and address, which were however false, he gave way and took his signature to a bond and lent him the 10 rupees. At this, the blacksmith's son set off in triumph to rejoin his brothers. He crossed the water in the same way as before and took the 10 rupees to his father. Then they all went on to another bazaar and bought dried rice and sweetmeats and curds and had a grand feast. Then their father proceeded to point out to his sons how, except the youngest, they were all useless. They had been unable to cross the channel or to make anything of their own piece of capital. They had nothing to answer, and all went home, and from that day nothing was heard of any proposal to divide the family until the old father and mother died. End of section 25. Section 26 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Sonali. Kora and His Sister. There were once 7 brothers, and they had one sister, who was the youngest of the family. The 6 eldest brothers were married, but no wife had been found for the youngest. For 3 years inquiries were made to try and find a suitable bride for him, but all in vain. At last the young man, whose name was Kora, told his parents and brothers not to trouble any more, as he would find a wife for himself. He intended to bring a flowering plant from the forest and plant it by the stand on which the watering pots were kept, and then he would marry any maiden who picked one of the flowers and put it in her hair. His father and mother approved of this proposal. So the next day he brought some sort of flowering plant and planted it by the water pot stand. He charged all his family to be most careful that no one of his own relations picked the flower, and also to warn any of the village girls who wanted to pick it, that if she did so and put it in her hair, she would thereby become his wife. But if, knowing this, anyone wished to do so, they were not to prevent her. The neighbors soon got to hear what the plant meant, and used often to come and look at it, and Kora watched it growing, till after a time it produced a bud, and then a beautiful and sweet-scented flower. All the village girls came to see the beautiful flower, and one day Kora's sister, when she went to the water stand to get some water to drink, got hold of it and longed to pick it. It looked so pretty. Her mother saw what she was doing and scolded her for touching the forbidden flower. But the girl begged to see what it would look like in her hair. There could be no harm done if she pulled the whole plant up by its roots and put it in her hair, and then replanted it. No one would know what had happened. In spite of her mother's remonstrances, she insisted on doing this, and having seen how the flower looked in her hair, carefully replanted it. Soon afterwards, Kora came home and went to see his flower. He knew at once that someone had worn it, and called to his mother and asked who it was. She protested that she knew nothing about the matter, but Kora said that he could tell by the smell that it had been worn, and then he showed that there was also a hair sticking to the flower. Then his mother admitted that in spite of all she could say, his sister had worn the flower and planted it again in the ground. When she saw that she was found out, the girl began to cry. But her father said that it was clearly fated that she and Kora should marry, and this was the reason why they had been unable to find any other bride. So they must now arrange for the wedding. Accordingly, rice was got ready, and all the usual preparations made for a marriage. The unfortunate girl saw that flight was her only means of escape from such a fate. So one day she ran away. All she took with her was a pet parrot. For many days she travelled on, and one day she stopped by a pool to bathe, and as she rubbed her limbs, she collected the scurf that she rubbed off her skin and put it on the ground in one place. Then she went on with the bathing. But at the place where she had put the scurf of her skin, a palm tree sprang up and grew so rapidly that, by the time she came out of the water, it had become a large tree. The girl was struck by this strange sight, and at once thought that the tree would afford her a safe refuge. So she climbed up it with her parrot in her hand, and when safely seated among the leaves, she begged the palm tree to grow so tall that no one would be able to find her. And the tree grew till it reached an unusual height. So the girl stayed in the tree top, and the parrot used to go every day and bring her food. Meanwhile, her parents and brothers searched high and low for her for 2 or 3 days, for the wedding day was close at hand. But the search was of course in vain, and they concluded that the girl must have drowned herself in some river. Time passed, and one day at noon, a Mahali girl, who was taking her basketware to market, stopped to rest in the shade of the palm tree. And as she sat there, Kora's sister called to her from the top of the tree and asked her to give her a small winnowing fan in exchange for a bracelet. The Mahali girl told her to throw the bracelet down first. Kora's sister made no objection to this, and when she got the bracelet, the Mahali girl threw up a winnowing fan which soared right up to where Kora's sister was sitting. Before the Mahali girl went on her way, Kora's sister made her promise never to let anyone see the bracelet when she went about selling her baskets, as otherwise it would be stolen from her. And secondly, on no account to let it be known that there was anyone in the palm tree, on pain of death. The Mahali girl kept her promise, and whenever she went out selling baskets, she used to keep her bracelet covered with her clothes. One day it chanced that she went to the house where Kora lived to sell her wares, and they asked her why it was that she kept her arm covered. She told them that she had a sore on it. They wanted to see how big the sore was, but she refused to show it, saying that if she showed it, she would die. They laughed at such a ridiculous story, and at last forced her to show her arm, which of course was quite well. But they at once recognized the bracelet and asked where she had got it from. The Mahali girl refused to tell them and said that if she did, she would die. "What a foolish girl you are," they objected. "First you say you will die if you show us your arm, and then if you tell us where you got this bracelet from. It belonged to our daughter, whom we have lost, and so you must tell us. Come, we will give you a basket full of rice if you tell us." The Mahali girl could not resist this offer, and when the basket of rice was produced, she told them where the palm tree was, in which Kora's sister was hiding. In all haste, the father and mother went to the tree and found that it was much too high for them to climb. So they begged their daughter to come down and promised not to marry her to her brother. But she would not come down. Then they sang, "You have made a palm tree from the scrapings of your skin, and have climbed up into it, daughter. Come, daughter, come down." But she only answered, "Father and mother, why do you cry? I must spend my life here. Do you return home?" So they went home in despair. Then her sisters-in-law came in their turn and sang, palm tree, give us back our sister. The brother and sister have got to be married." But she would not answer them nor come down from the tree, so they had to go home without her. Then all her other relations came and besought her to come down, but she would not listen to them. So they went away and invoked a storm to come to their aid. A storm arose and cold rain fell, till the girl in the palm tree was soaked and shivering, and the wind blew and swayed the palm tree so that it kept touching the ground. At last she could bear the cold and wet no more, and, seizing an opportunity when the tree touched the ground, she slipped off. Her relations had made all the villagers promise, on no account, to let her into their houses. So when she went into the village and called out at house after house, no one answered her or opened to her. Then she went to her own home, and there also they refused to open to her. But Kora had lit a big fire in the cow house and sat by it warming himself, knowing that the girl would have to come to him. And as she could find no shelter elsewhere, she had to go to his fire. And then she sat and warmed herself and thought, I fled for fear of this man, and now I have come back to him. This is the end. I can no longer stay in this world. The people will not even let me into their houses. I have no wish to see them again. So she sat and thought, and when she was warmed, she lay down by the side of Kora, and he wore tied to his waist a nail cutter. She unfastened this and cut her throat with it as she lay. Her death struggles aroused Kora, and he got up and saw the ground covered with her blood, and he saw that she had killed herself with his nail cutter. Then he took counsel with himself and also cut his throat in the same way. In the morning, the two corpses were found lying side by side, and it was seen that their blood refused to mingle but had flowed in opposite directions. So they took the bodies away to burn them and laid them on one pyre. And when the fire was lit, it was seen that the smoke from the two bodies rose separately into the air. Then all who saw it said, We wished to marry brother and sister, but Chando would not approve of it. See how their blood would not mingle, though spilt on the same floor, and how the smoke from the pyre rises in two separate columns. It is plain that the marriage of brother and sister is wrong. From that time, such marriages have been discontinued. End of section 26. Section 27 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompis. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A story on caste. There was once a village inhabited only by Musahars. Among them was one girl who was so beautiful that she seemed more than human. Her father and mother were so proud of her looks that they determined not to marry her to a man of their own caste. They were constantly discussing whom they should choose as a son-in-law. One day, they began to consider who were the greatest persons in the world. The old woman was of opinion that there was no one greater than Chando, the sun god, and suggested that they should marry the girl to him. Her husband agreed, and off they set and presented themselves before Chando. Chando asked why they had come. Oh, Chando, we understand that you are the greatest being in the world, and we have come to marry our daughter to you. Chando answered, I fancy there is someone greater than I. Who is he? Asked the parents. The cloud is greater than I, for it can hide my face and quench my rays. At this, the father and mother hurried off with their daughter in search of the cloud, and when they found him, told him that they had brought their daughter to give him to wife, as he was the greatest being in the world. I may be great, said the cloud, but there is a greater than I, the wind. The wind rises and blows me away in a minute. So they went in search of the wind, and when they found him, explained to him why they had brought him the daughter. The wind said, I am strong, but there are stronger than I. The mountains are stronger. I can blow things down or whirl them away, but I cannot move the mountains. So on they went to the mountain and explained their errand. The mountain said, I am great, but there are more powerful than I. The ground rat is more powerful, for however high I may be, the ground rats burrow holes in me and I cannot resist them." The poor parents by this time began to feel rather discouraged, but they still made up their minds to persevere and went on to look for the ground rat. They found him and offered him their daughter in marriage. But the ground rat denied that he was the most powerful being on earth. The Musahas were more powerful, for they lived by digging out ground rats and eating them. The hapless couple went home very dejectedly, reflecting that they had begun by despising their own caste and had gone in search of something greater and had ended where they begun. So they arranged to marry their daughter to a man of their own caste after all. Moral: you should not despise your own caste or race. You cannot help what caste you are born into. A Santal may learn to read and write and associate with men of good position, and thereby his mind may be perverted. He may wish to change his caste, become a sadhu, or a khedwar, or a boistab, or a Mussalman, or a Christian, or anything else, but people will still know him for a beef-eating Santhal. If he becomes a Christian, no one will think him the equal of a Sahib or a Brahmin. No Sahib will marry his daughter or give him his daughter in marriage. Remember what happened to the Musahar, who despised his own caste. God caused you to be born in a certain caste. He and not we made the different castes, and He knows what is good and bad for us. End of section 27. Section 28 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tipi and Tepa. Tipi and Tepa dwelt together and lived on baked cakes. One day they met a bear in the jungle. "Now I will eat you," growled the bear. "Spare us," said Tipi and Tepa, "and tomorrow we will beg some food and bake it into cakes and give it to you." So the bear let them go away to beg. But when they came back, they ate the food which they had procured, and then hid themselves inside a hollow gourd. The bear came and looked about for them, but could not find them, and went away. The next day, Tipi and Tepa again went out begging, and as luck would have it, again met the bear. "Now I will eat you," said the bear. "No," said they. "Let us go and beg some food for you." So they went off begging, and came back and baked cakes and ate them, and then hid inside the gourd. The bear came and carried off the gourd on its shoulder, and began to pick plums and other fruit and put them into the gourd. As fast as the fruit was put in, Tipi and Tepa ate it up. "It is a very funny thing that the gourd does not become full," thought the bear. But Tepa ate so much that at last he burst, with such a noise that the bear threw down the gourd and ran away. End of section 28. Section 29 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Child with the Ears of an Ox. Once upon a time, a son was born to a certain Raja, and the child had the ears of an ox. The Raja was very much ashamed and let no one know. But the secret could not be kept from the barber, who had to perform the ceremony of shaving the child's head. However, the Raja made the barber vow not to tell anyone of what he had seen. So the barber went away, but the secret, which he might not tell, had an unfortunate effect. It made his stomach swell to an enormous size. As the barber went along in this unhappy condition, he met a dome, who asked why his stomach was so swollen. The barber said that it was because he had shaved the Raja's child, and had seen that it had the ears of an ox. Directly he had broken his vow and blurted out the secret, his stomach returned to its usual size. The dome went his way and cut down a tree and made a drum out of the wood, and went about playing on the drum and begging. He came to the Raja's palace, and there he drummed and sang, "The son of the Raja has the ears of an ox." When the Raja heard this, he was very angry, and swore to punish the barber who must have broken his vow. But the dome assured the Raja that he knew nothing about the matter, that it was the drum that sang the words and not he, and that he had no idea what they meant. So the Raja was pacified and gave the dome a present and sent him away, and the barber was not punished. End of section 29. Section 30 of the Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bumpus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Child Who Knew His Father. Once upon a time, there was a girl whose parents took the greatest care that she should not be familiar with any of the young men of the village. But in spite of their precautions, she formed an intimacy with a young man and was presently found to be with child. When this became known, the villagers held a panchayat to inquire into the matter, but the girl flatly declined to give any information, and her father and brothers were unable to point out the offender. So the village elders decided to let the matter stand over till the child was born. When the birth took place, the question arose in whose name its head should be shaved, as its father was still unknown. The villagers decided that this should be settled when the child was old enough to talk. So when the child was 2 or 3 years old and could prattle a little, the girl's father went to the headman and Paranik and asked them what was to be done. They said that he must pay a fine to them and another to the villagers, because he had made the village unclean for so long, and give a feast to the villagers, and then they would find out the father of the child and make him marry the girl, and if he refused to do this, he would be outcasted. The unfortunate man agreed, and then the Jogmanji and Godit were sent to call all the men of the neighborhood to a meeting. They assembled in their best clothes and pagris and sat down in rows, and in the middle a circle was drawn on the ground. Then prayers were offered to Chando, and the child was set in the circle and told to find its father. The child began to walk slowly along the lines of men, but it did not stop till it came to its real father, who was sitting a little apart, and then it threw itself into his arms. Thus the truth was discovered, and the man married the girl, and, as he was very poor, went to live in his father-in-law's house. End of section 30. Section 31 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bumpus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jogeshwar's marriage. Once upon a time, there was a young man of the weaver caste named Jogeshwar. He was an orphan and lived all alone. One summer, he planted a field of pumpkins on the sandy bed of a river. The plants grew well and bore plenty of fruit, but when the pumpkins were ripe, a jackal found them out and went every night and feasted on them. Jogeshwar soon found out from the footmarks who was doing the damage. So he set a snare, and a few days later found the jackal caught in it. He took a stick to beat its life out, but the jackal cried, "Spare me, and I will find you a wife." So Jogeshwar stayed his hand and released the jackal, who promised at once to set off about the business. The jackal kept his word and went to a city where a Raja lived. There he sat down on the bank of one of the Raja's tanks. To this tank, the servants from the palace brought the pots and dishes to be washed, and to this tank also came the Rani and princesses to bathe. Whenever the servants came to wash their dishes, the jackal kept on repeating, "What sort of a Raja is this, whose plates are washed in water in which people have bathed? There is no Raja like Raja Jogeshwar. He eats of golden plates, and yet he never uses them a second time, but throws them away directly he has eaten of them once." The servants soon carried word to the Raja of the jackal who sat by the tank and of his story of Raja Jogeshwar. Then the Raja sent for the jackal and asked why he had come. The jackal answered that he was looking for a bride for Raja Jogeshwar. Now the Raja had 3 or 4 daughters, and he thought that he saw his way to a fine match for one of them. So he sent for the young women and asked the jackal to say whether one of them would be a suitable bride for Raja Jogeshwar. The jackal chose the second sister and said that he would go and get the consent of Raja Jogeshwar. The jackal hurried back and told the astonished weaver that he had found a Raja's daughter for him to marry. Jogeshwar had nothing to delay him, and only asked that an early day might be fixed for the wedding. So the jackal went back to the Raja and received from him the knotted string that fixed the date of the wedding. The jackal had now to devise some means by which Jogeshwar could go through the wedding ceremonies without his poverty being found out. He first went to the Raja and asked how many attendants Raja Jogeshwar should bring with him, as he did not want to bring more than the bride's father could entertain. The Raja was too proud to fix any number, and said they could bring as many as they liked. Jogeshwar, having no relations and no money, was quite unable to arrange for a grand procession to escort him. He could only just afford to hire a palki in which to be carried to the bride's house. So the jackal sent word to all the jackals and paddy birds of the neighborhood to come to a feast at the palace of the bride, an invitation which was eagerly accepted. At the time fixed, they started off, with all the paddy birds riding on the backs of the jackals. When they came within sight of the palace, the jackal ran on ahead and invited the Raja to come out and look at the procession, as there was still time to send them back if there were too many. But it would be a great disgrace if they were allowed to arrive and find no entertainment. The Raja went out to look, and when he saw the procession stretching away for a distance of 2 miles or more, with all the paddy birds looking like white horsemen as they rode on the backs of the jackals, his heart failed him, and he begged the jackal to send them away, as he could not entertain such a host. So then the jackal hurried back and turned them all away, and Jogeshwar reached the palace, accompanied only by his palki bearers. Before the wedding feast, the jackal gave Jogeshwar some hints as to his behavior. He warned him that 3 or 4 kinds of meat and vegetables would be handed round with the rice, and bade him to be sure to help himself from each dish. Of course, in his own house the poor weaver had never had more than 1 dish to eat with his rice, and when pan was handed to him after the feast, he was not to take any until he had a handful of money given him. By such behavior, he would lead everyone to think that he was really a prince. Jogeshwar did exactly as he was told, and he was thought a very grand personage. The next evening, Jogeshwar set off homewards with his bride, the bride's brothers and attendants accompanying them. They travelled on and on till the bride's party began to grow tired and kept asking the jackal how much further they had to go. The jackal kept on putting them off, till at last they came in sight of a grove of palm trees, and he told them that Raja Jogeshwar's palace stood among the palm trees, but was so old and weather-worn that it could not be seen from a distance. When they reached the palm grove and found nothing but Jogeshwar's humble hut, the bride's brothers turned on the jackal and asked what he meant by deceiving them. The jackal protested that he had told no lies. The weaver ate every day off plates made of dry leaves and threw them away when done with, and that was all he meant when he talked of golden plates. At this excuse, they turned on him and wanted to beat him, but he ran away and escaped. The bride's friends went back and told the Raja how things had turned out, and as divorce was not lawful for them, the Raja could only send for his daughter and her husband and give them an estate to live on. End of section 31. Section 32 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Strong Man. There was once a strong man, but no one knew of his strength. He was in the service of a farmer, who made him head man over all his labourers. In those days, much of the country was still covered with jungle. One day, the farmer chose a piece of forest land which he thought suitable for cultivation, and told his labourers to set to work and clear it. And as usual, after giving his orders, he troubled himself no more about the matter, as he could fully rely on the strong man. The next morning, the strong man set the other labourers to work ploughing a field, and then said that he would go and have a look at the jungle which his master wanted cleared. So he went off alone, with only a stick in his hand. When he reached the place, he walked all round it, and saw how much could be made into good arable land. And then he began to clear it. He pulled up the trees by the roots and piled them into a heap, and he took the rocks and threw them to one side, and made the ground quite clear and smooth, and then went back to the house. On being asked why he had been so long away, he answered that he had been pulling up a few bushes at the place which was to be cleared. The following morning, the strong man told the farm labourers to take their ploughs to the clearing and begin to plough it. When the farmer heard this, he was puzzled to think how the land could be ready for ploughing so soon, and went to see it, and to his amazement found the whole land cleared, every tree pulled up by the roots, and all the rocks removed. Then he asked the strong man whether he had done the work by himself. The strong man answered, no. A number of people had volunteered to help him, and so the work had been finished in a day. The farmer said nothing, but he did not believe the story, and saw that his servant must really be a man of marvellous strength. Neither he nor the farm labourers let anyone else know what had happened. They kept it to themselves. Now the strong man's wages were 12 measures of rice a year. After working for 4 years, he made up his mind to leave his master and start farming on his own account. So he told the farmer that he wished to leave, but offered to finish any work there was to do before he went, that no one might be able to say that he had gone away, leaving his work half done. The farmer assured him that there was nothing for him to do, and gave him rice equal to his 4 years' wages. The rice made 2 big bundles, each more than an ordinary man could lift, but the strong man slung them onto a bamboo and carried them off over his shoulder. After he had gone a little way, it struck the farmer that it would not do to let him display his strength in this way, and that it would be better if he took the rice away at night. So he had the strong man called back, and told him that there was one job which he had forgotten to finish. He had put 2 bundles of Sabai grass into the trough too steep, and had forgotten to twist it into string. Without a word, the strong man went
and picked the Sabai out of the water and began to twist it. But he could tell at once by the feel that the Sabai had only just been placed in the water, and he charged the farmer with playing a trick on him. The farmer swore that there was no trick, and rather than quarrel, the strong man went on with the work. While he was so engaged, the farmer offered him some tobacco, and the strong man took it without washing and wiping his hands. Now no one should prepare or chew tobacco while twisting Sabai. If one does not first wash and dry one's hands, one's strength will go. The strong man knew this, but he was so angry at being called back on false pretenses that he forgot all about it. But when he had finished the string and the farmer said that he might go, he essayed to take up the 2 bundles of rice as before. To his sorrow, he found that he could not lift them. Then he saw the mistake that he had made. He had to leave 1 bundle behind and divide the other into 2 halves and sling them on the bamboo and carry them off with him. The strong man's cultivation did not prosper, and after 3 or 4 years he found himself at the end of his means and had again to take service with a farmer. One day, when field work was in full swing, the strong man had a quarrel with his new master. So when he had finished the morning's ploughing, he pulled the iron point of the ploughshare out of its socket and snapped it in two. Then he took the pieces to his master and explained that it had caught on the stump of a tree and got broken. The master took the broken share to the blacksmith and had it mended. The next day the strong man went through the same performance, and his master had again to go the blacksmith. The same thing happened several days running, till at last the farmer decided to keep watch and see what really happened. So he hid himself and saw the strong man snap the ploughshare in two. But in view of such a display of strength, he was much too frightened to let his servant know that he had found out the trick that was being played on him. He took the pieces to the blacksmith as usual, and at the smithy he found some of his friends and told them what had happened. They advised him to set the strong man to twisting Sabai string, and then by some pretext induce him to take tobacco. The farmer did as they advised, and in about a fortnight the strong man lost all his strength and became as other men. Then his master dismissed him, and he had to go back to his house, and his strength never returned to him. End of section 32.
Section 33 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Raja's Advice. Once upon a time, an aged Raja lay dying. Before he breathed his last, he sent for his only son and gave him the following advice. "My son," he said, "never go on a journey alone. Do not associate with low people, for if you do, no one will respect you. Never confide a secret to your wife. Do not tell outsiders the affairs of your house. Do not let village affairs go beyond the village street, and never get into a rage." The son succeeded to the Raja, and shortly afterwards set out to pay a visit to his wife's relations. He started alone, and after going some distance, he remembered his father's injunctions never to go on a journey alone. He had gone too far to go back, and he saw no one within call. So he looked about and presently found a crab hole. He set to work and dug out the crab, and fixing it in his pagdi, continued his journey. By and by he came to a river. Now in this river lived a crocodile, which had leagued with a crow to destroy travellers crossing the river. Whenever the crow saw anyone coming, it gave warning to the crocodile, and the crocodile then seized a traveller as he entered the river, while the crow pecked out his eyes. In this way, there had been the death of many travellers. So when the crow saw the young Raja coming, it called to the crocodile, which hastened to the ford and seized the Raja as he stepped into the water, while the crow flew at his head. But the crab caught the crow by the leg and nipped it so hard that the crow, in agony, called out to the crocodile to let the man go, as it was being killed. So the crocodile released its hold, and the Raja struggled to the bank, and then caught the crow, which was held fast by the crab, and wrung its neck. Then he went back home with the crab, reflecting on the wisdom of his father's advice. Later on, the Raja thought that he would put another of his father's maxims to the proof and see what would happen if he told his wife a secret. So he took a spade and buried an old earthen pot in the corner of his garden. He let his wife see him, and she promptly asked what he was burying. He put her off, but that night she insisted so much on knowing that, after swearing her to secrecy, he told her that the child had come straying to his house and he had killed it to obtain good luck and had buried the body. Time passed, and one day the Raja had a quarrel with his wife. He began to beat her, and she in return abused him and kept on calling out that he was a murderer who had buried a child in his garden. Then next door neighbor heard all this and, directly she found the Raja's wife alone, asked whether what she said was true. The Raja's wife, being still in a passion, asserted that it was quite true. The story was soon all over the town, and the townspeople rose and seized the Raja and charged him with the murder. Then he took them to the garden and made them dig up what he had buried, and they found only an old pot. So they had to pay him compensation for making a false charge, and the Raja valued more than ever the advice given him by his father. End of section 33. Section 34 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Four Jogis. Once four Jogis were out on a begging expedition and came to a city where a Raja lived. As they went along, they discussed how they should beg of the Raja, and while they were discussing the point, they saw a field rat, and one of them exclaimed, "I know how I shall beg of him. I shall say, 'See, he throws up the earth, scrapety scrape.'" This did not help the other three, but, further on, some frogs jumped into a pond as they passed by, and one of the others at once said, "I know what I shall say. I shall say, 'Plumpety plump, down he has sat.'" A little later they saw a pig wallowing in the mud, and the third jogi called out, "I have it. I shall say, 'Rub away, rub away. Now some more water. Rub away, rub away.' I know, my boys, what you are going to do." The fourth jogi was still in perplexity, but when they came in sight of the Raja's city, he exclaimed, "I know what I shall say. Highways and byways, what a big city! The Kotwal is going his rounds, his rounds." Then they got a man to write down these four forms of address on a sheet of paper and presented it to the Raja. The Raja took it and read it and could not make head or tail of it. And when the four Jogis saw him looking so puzzled, they got frightened and took to their heels, for they could not read themselves and were not sure of what the paper really contained. Now the Raja's chief officer was a Tehsildar, and he had also a barber, who shaved him every day. And that evening, after the Jogis had run away, the Tehsildar proposed to the barber that, when shaving the Raja the next morning, he should cut the Raja's throat, and they could then divide the kingdom between them. And the barber consented. Not content with this, The Tehsildar and the palace Chaukidar that same night tried to break into the Raja's palace and steal his money and jewelry. They began to cut a hole through the mud wall of the Raja's room. But it chanced that the Raja was so puzzled by the paper which the Jogis had put into his hand that he kept on reading it over and over again. And just as the Tehsildar and Chaukidar had half cut their way through the wall, they heard the Raja saying, "See, he throws up the earth, scrapety scrape." At once they concluded that they had been heard and they crouched down. The Raja went on, "Plumpety plump, down he has sat." This made them think that they had been seen, and the Chaukidar crept to the door to listen. He heard the Raja saying, "Highways and byways, what a big city! The Kotwal is going his rounds, his rounds." Then the Chaukidar felt sure that he was discovered, and he ran off with the Tehsildar without completing their burglary. The next morning the barber went to shave the Raja, and while he was sharpening the razor, the Raja again began to study the mysterious paper, murmuring, rub away, now some more water, rub away, rub away. I know, my boy, what you are going to do." The barber thought that the Raja referred to his rubbing water over his face for shaving, and concluded that the Tehsildar had revealed the plot. So he threw himself at the Raja's feet and confessed everything, swearing that the Tehsildar and not he was to blame. The Raja at once sent for the Chaukidar to take the Tehsildar and barber to prison. When the Chaukidar came in, he found the Raja repeating, "See, he throws up the earth, scrapety scrape." He at once concluded that the Raja was referring to the burglary, and he fell on his knees and confessed all that had happened. This was news to the Raja, but he went and saw the place where the wall had been partly cut through, and then he sent all the guilty men to prison and dispatched messengers to look for the Jogis who had been the means of saving his life and property. But the Jogis had been so frightened and had run away so far that they were never found. End of section 34. Section 35 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2. Translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Charitable Raja. There was once a Raja who was very charitable. He used to give a new cloth and a good meal to everyone who came and begged of him. But one day a Jogi came and refused to take what was offered to him. He demanded that the Raja should give him his kingdom and everything that he had. The Raja thought it wrong to refuse the request, and went out into the world with his wife and his 2 young children, a beggar. For a long time they wandered about living on charity, till their clothes were worn to rags, and then they chanced to hear of a rich merchant who gave a cloth to any beggar who asked it of him. So they resolved to go to him for help. When they reached the village where the merchant lived, the Rani left the Raja with the 2 children to cook some dinner and went to the merchant's house to beg for some clothes. But when the merchant saw her, he fell in love with her and shut her up and would not let her go. To be saved from the merchant's designs, the Rani prayed that she might be smitten with disease, and at once she became very ill. After waiting in vain for her return, the Raja set off with his 2 sons to look for her, and presently came to a flooded river. He carried one child across first, but as he was returning for the other, he was swept away by the current, and the children were left alone. A Goala woman, going to the river for water, found them, and as she was childless, took them home with her and brought them up. Meanwhile, the Raja was carried downstream by the flood and was washed ashore, bruised and wounded, a long way down. At the place where he landed, a large crowd was collected, for the Raja of the country had lately died, leaving no heir, and the widow had ordered all the people to assemble in order that two elephants, belonging to the late Raja, might choose his successor. The half drowned Raja joined the crowd, and as he sat looking on, one elephant, passing by its own people, came to him and put the golden necklace on his neck, and the other elephant lifted him onto its back and carried him off and seated him on the Raja's throne. And as he sat on the throne, all his wounds and bruises were healed. Years passed, and the Raja's two sons grew up, and as the Goala woman who had adopted them was very poor, they went out into the world to earn their living. As it chanced, they took service as Sipahis with the Raja, their father, whom of course they did not recognize. Just after their arrival, the Raja arranged a great festival at which people from all parts assembled, and among others, the merchant went there with the Raja's wife, in hopes that among the crowd he might find some physician able to cure the woman. When he arrived, he went to the Raja and asked that two Sipahis might be deputed to keep watch over the woman he had brought. The Raja sent his two newly enlisted Sipahis, and thus the sons were set to guard their own mother. And it was not long before they found out their relationship. The Rani was delighted to recover her long-lost children, but when she heard that her husband had been washed away by the river and drowned, she began to weep and wail. The merchant went to the Raja and complained that the Sipahis who had been sent had thrown the woman into great distress, and the Raja thereupon sent for all the parties in order that he might inquire into the matter. When he heard their story, he at once recognized that it was his own wife and sons who stood before him, and thus the whole family was happily united. Then his wife prayed to Thakur that if she were really the wife he had lost and had been faithful to him, she might be restored to health. Water was poured over her, and she was at once cured of her disease, and they all lived happily ever afterwards. End of section 35. Section 36 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A variant, The Wandering Raja. Once there was a Raja who was very prosperous, but his wife found their life of wealth and ease monotonous, and she continually urged him to travel into other countries and to see whether other modes of life were pleasant or distressful. She pestered her husband so much that at last he gave way. He put his kingdom in charge of his father's sister and her husband, and set off with his wife and his two sons as an ordinary traveller. After travelling some days, they got tired of eating the parched rice which they had brought with them, and thought they would boil some rice for their dinner. So the Rani went into a bazaar to get cooking pots and a light for the fire. She went to the house of a rich merchant for these, but he was attracted by her beauty and seized her and shut her up and would not let her go back, but kept her as his wife. The Raja and his sons soon got tired of waiting for her. He concluded that the journey was merely a pretext of his wife's to escape from him, as she had disappeared the first time that he let her out of his sight. So he turned to go home, and soon came to a river which had to be crossed. He left his sons on the bank and went into the water to see how deep it was, and as he was wading in, a large fish came and swallowed him.
the fish swam away downstream and was caught in the net of some fishermen. When they saw how big a fish they had caught, they decided to take it to the Raja of that country. The Raja bought it at a high price, but when it was cut open at the palace, the man it had swallowed was found alive inside. So the Raja of the country appointed him one of his retainers. Meanwhile, the two boys had been found abandoned on the bank of the river by a cowherd, who was too poor to bring them up. So he took them also to the Raja, and they rejoiced to meet their father, and when they grew up, were also appointed retainers. They had to travel all over the country on the Raja's business, and it happened that they one day came to the village where their mother was, and they met and recognized her. She told them how she had been seized and confined and begged them to bring her husband to her. So the sons fetched their father, and the Rani told her husband how unhappy she was and begged him to get her released, and he promised to ask the help of his master. When the Raja of the country heard the story, he took pity on them and went with a body of soldiers and seized the wicked merchant and ordered him to give up all his wealth. And as the merchant tried to conceal where some of his money was buried, the Raja cut him down with his sword. He also laid a heavy fine on the villagers, because they had not sent word to him of the capture of the Rani. Then he took home the Raja who had been swallowed by the fish and his wife and sons, and entertained them for some days, and then gave them elephants and horses and men and all the merchant's property, and sent them to their own country. The uncle and aunt, who had been appointed regents, came out to meet them and escorted them home. 2 or 3 days after, the aunt asked the Raja how he had got his elephants and horses and money, and he said, "They are the profits of my wife's sin. I will not tell you the whole story, for if you heard it, you also might be led astray. My wife induced me to travel by false pretenses. It is not good to follow the advice of a woman. It is by mere chance that you see me alive today." His wife heard what he said, and she went out and cut her throat from remorse, and they went and burned her body. End of section 36. Section 37 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Two Wives. There was once a Raja and his Diwan who had each one son, and the two boys were great friends. Both had been married in their infancy, and when they grew up and heard that they had wives, they agreed to go together and visit them. So they set out, and they arranged that on account of the superior rank of the Raja's son, they would go first and visit his wife. And they also agreed that, as they were going to a strange place, they would keep together day and night. When they reached the house of the prince's father-in-law, they were received with great honor, and when night came, they lay down with their beds side by side. Presently, the prince's wife came to him and began to rub his arms and legs until she had soothed him off to sleep. The Diwan's son pretended also to go fast asleep, but really he was careful to keep awake, for he thought it safer to be on the watch in a strange place. His prudence was rewarded, for after a time he saw the prince's wife leave her sleeping husband and go out of the house. The Diwan's son followed her and saw her enter the house of a Gosain who lived on the outskirts of the village. He went near and listened at the door. He heard the Gosain ask the young woman why she was so late in coming. and her answer that she had been detained by the visit of her husband. The Gosain reproached her for not having told him that she was married, and she protested that she had known nothing about it until her husband appeared. The Gosain said that she must choose between him and her husband, and she answered that she would never give him up. Then, said the Gosain, if you really mean it, go and bring me your husband's head. At this, the Divan's son hurried back and lay down on his bed. Presently, he saw the woman come with a sword and cut off her husband's head. But when she took it to the Gosain, he rose and beat her with his iron pincers and drove her out, swearing that he would have nothing more to do with a woman who was so heartless as to kill her own husband. Then the woman returned and placed the severed head by her husband's body and raised a great outcry that her husband had been murdered. The people of the house came, and at first they charged the Divan's son with the crime and were about to put him to death. But he called the Gosain as a witness, and the real facts were proved by his evidence, and the murderess was hanged. The Divan's son would not allow the prince's body to be burnt, but insisted on taking it with him, that it might be cremated at his own home. So he took it on his back and carried it off. He thought that, as he had come so far, it would be better to visit his own wife before going home. So, when he reached the village where his wife lived, he hid the prince's body in a hollow tree and went to his father-in-law's house. That night, when they had gone to bed, the Divan's son saw that his wife had something on her mind, so he resolved to watch her. When she thought that he was asleep, he saw her rise and go out of the house. He followed her to a shrine of Mahadev. There she smeared the ground with cow dung and worshipped the god and said, "O Shiva, I have worshipped you for many days. Now my husband has come to take me to his house, and you must find another worshipper." The Mahadev answered, "You have served me for many days. Call hither your husband. As you have worshipped me for so long, I will confer a boon on you." So she went and called her husband, and as he knew what had happened, he had no hesitation in going with her to the shrine. There the Shiv bade him ask a boon, and he prayed that the Raja's son might be restored to life. The Shiv bade them bring the body and cover it with a wet cloth, and when they had done so, the body began to breathe, and presently the prince rose up alive and well. The Divan's son told him all that had happened, and the next day they went home, taking with them the wife of the Divan's son, through whose virtue and piety the prince had been restored to life. End of section 37.
Section 38 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Spanling and His Uncles. There was once a little man named Spanling, Beta, because he was only a span, Beta, high, and he had a beard 1 span and 4 finger breadths long. His father was dead, and he lived alone with his mother, and he was as cunning as anyone in the world. He had 1 cow buffalo, and this he always grazed at night, for fear that the sun might melt it. Once it happened that as he was following his buffalo, he got buried in its droppings, and he was so small that he could not get out. However, next morning, some girls who were gathering cow dung for fuel found him and set him free. Spanling decided to get rid of the buffalo after this, so he killed it and flayed it and when the skin was dry, took it away to sell. Before he found a purchaser, night came on, so he climbed a tree with his hide to be out of danger. During the night, a gang of thieves came to the tree and began to divide their booty. While they were busy over this, Spanling let the hide fall with a clatter in their midst, and they all ran away in a fright, leaving all their stolen goods behind. When day dawned, Spanling climbed down and found piles of gold waiting for him. He took it home and sent his mother to borrow a wooden measure from his uncles to measure it with. When he returned the measure, one of the gold pieces was left sticking in a crack. His uncles at once hastened to inquire how he came to be measuring gold. Spanling told them that he had sold his buffalo skin at a town which he named, for an enormous price, and no doubt they could find the same market if they chose to kill their buffaloes. The uncles hurried home and killed all their buffaloes and took the hides to the city which Spanling had named, but they were only laughed at when they asked more than the price which was paid every day for hides. The uncles came home very angry at the way in which they had been tricked by Spanling, and in revenge they burnt his house down. Finding himself homeless, Spanling gathered the ashes of his house into sacks, loaded them on a cart, and drove away. When evening came, he camped by the roadside in company with some other carters, and, in the middle of the night, he quietly changed his sacks of ashes for some of the sacks in the other carts. When he got home, he found that the sacks which he had stolen were full of gold coins. He again sent to his uncles for a measure, and when the measure was returned, a gold coin was again left sticking in a crack. The uncles at once came to inquire how Spanling had got the money. He told them that he had sold the ashes of his house for gold, and, as their houses were bigger than his, they would doubtless make their fortunes if they burnt them down and sold the ashes. The uncles took his advice, but when they tried to sell the ashes, they were only laughed at for their pains. End of section 38. Section 39 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Silent Wife. There was once a madcap of a fellow, whose wife got on very well with him, and did all the housework very nicely, but she would never speak a single word to him. As nothing he tried would make her speak, the madcap at last hit on a plan of taking her on a long journey. But even when he told his wife that she must come with him to a far country, she did not utter a word. When all was ready for a start, the madcap bathed his feet and took a lota of water into the house, and pouring it, prayed to the spirit of his grandfather thus: "Grandfather, grant that my wife may speak. If you do not fail me in this, I will make offerings to you on my return. Grant that we may come back together happily. Teach her to speak to me soon." Then he set out with his wife, and they travelled on until they entered a dense forest, where there was no sign of human habitation. As they went on, the tailor birds and babblers began to chatter and scream at them. The madcap got angry at this, and called out to the birds that if they did not stop, he would chase them and go on chasing them for a day and a night. Then he sat down and watched them. His wife stood waiting by his side, and soon she began to wonder what she would do and where she would go if her husband really went in chase of the birds. So at last she spoke to him and said, "Come, get up. We must make haste out of this jungle." Directly the words were out of her mouth, The madcap knelt down and bowing to the ground said, "I thank you, grandfather." Then he rose and went on with his wife. Presently they met a bear. The madcap called out, "You brute of a bear! What do you mean by coming to meet us like this? I will chase you and go on chasing you till tomorrow morning." But his wife besought him to come along and not leave her. Directly she spoke, the madcap cried, "Bravo!" and kneeling down, thanked his grandfather. They went on, and presently a jackal crossed their path. The madcap cursed it, and vowed that he would chase it all the night. Again his wife urged him to come on, and again the madcap knelt down and thanked his grandfather. But his wife did not know why he did so, nor did she trouble to ask. Just as they reached the edge of the forest, they saw a leopard, and this also the madcap threatened to chase. "Then go and chase it," said his wife, who now felt safe. So he went in pursuit of the leopard, but after going a little way, he lost sight of it and went back to where his wife was. "What has become of all your boasting?" said she. "You have not chased it till tomorrow morning." "No," said the madcap, "I have killed it. If you don't believe me, come and see." But she did not want to go back into the jungle and said no more about it. As his wife had broken her silence, the madcap saw no use in going further, and they turned homewards. All the way his wife went on chatting and singing along with him. When he reached home, he sacrificed a number of goats to his grandfather, and lived happily with his wife ever after. End of section 39. Section 40 of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bumpus. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Dumb Shepherd. There was once a very rich and powerful Raja, and in his heart he thought that there was no one so powerful in the world as himself. Thus he thought, but he told no one of his thought. One day he made up his mind to see whether others could guess what he was thinking. So he called together his officers and servants and dependents and bade them tell him what thought was in his heart. Many of them made guesses, but no one gave an answer which satisfied the Raja. Then the Raja told his Diwan that he must without fail find someone who would guess his thought, and he gave the Diwan exactly 1 month's time in which to search. The Diwan searched high and low, but all in vain. And as the time drew near, he grew more and more anxious, for he feared that he would fall into disgrace. But he had a daughter, and she consoled him and told him to cheer up, as she would find a man on the day fixed to read the Raja's thoughts. The Divan had to take what comfort he could from this promise, and when the appointed day arrived, his daughter brought a dumb shepherd, whom they employed, and bade her father take him to the Raja. The Divan thought it very unlikely that the dumb shepherd would succeed where others had failed, but he saw no alternative to following his daughter's advice. So the Divan presented himself before the Raja with the dumb shepherd and found a large company assembled to see what happened. The two stood before the Raja, and the dumb man looked at the Raja. Then the Raja held up one finger. At this, the dumb shepherd held up 2 fingers. Then the Raja held up 3 fingers. But at this, the dumb man made signs of dissent and ran away as fast as he could. Then the Raja laughed and seemed very pleased and praised the Divan for having brought him such a clever man, and gave the Divan a rich reward. The Divan was still at a loss to know what had happened, and begged the Raja to explain what had passed between him and the shepherd. When I held up one finger, said the Raja, I asked him whether I alone was Raja, and he, by holding up two, reminded me that there was God, who was as powerful as I am. Then I asked him whether there was any third, and he vehemently denied that there was. Thus he has read my thoughts, for I have always been thinking that I alone am powerful, but he has reminded me that there is God as well, but no third. Then they all went their ways, and that night the Divan questioned the dumb shepherd as to how he had been able to understand the Raja. And the dumb man explained, I have only 3 sheep of my own, and when I appeared before the Raja, he held up one finger, meaning that he wanted me to give him one of my sheep. And as he is a great Raja, I offered to give him two. But when he held up 3 fingers to show that he wanted to take all 3 from me, I thought that he was going too far, and so I ran away. By this lucky chance, the Divan earned his reward from the Raja. End of section 40. End of Folklore of the Santal Parganas, Volume 2, translated by Cecil Henry Bompus.